A single passenger ship of prodigious size lay anchored in the port town in the northeast of the Principality of Reverie. Extravagantly crafted from top to bottom, a single glance was enough to discern its intended clientele, the privileged few among society's upper crust. True to appearances, the passengers boarding the vessel that day most certainly fit the bill, each smartly dressed and adorned with conspicuous opulence. Even among such guests, however, two stood out: a young lady possessed of regal air, and the butler at her side. Judging from the dress behavior and linguistic register, they suited the setting to a prim and proper T. The single factor that set them apart from the other guests was their ages. Neither looked to be much older than the 12 or perhaps 13 years old, making them mere children in the eyes of most. Just a moment, my lady." The young butler labored to keep pace with the young lady as he dragged a large suitcase behind him. Despite this, she continued to stride forward, not slowing her pace in the slightest. Exhaustion creased his weary brow. His attire was proper as befitting his station, but unkempt hair, grown out long enough to completely obscure his eyes, was another story. On top of that, everything about his demeanor screamed that he was timid and weak of spirit. "Snap out of it, you dullard!" the young lady brusquely shouted, now several paces ahead of the struggling boy. "If you can't make those legs move any faster, I'll cut them off and feed them to the hounds." She continued to increase her pace, while assailing her butler with unending strings of contemptuous words. Her arrogant, haughty demeanor stood in stark contrast to her graceful appearance. Dressed in a lovely black-frilled dress, her blue eyes shone like a pair of sparkling sapphires, and her twin pigtails curled slightly in perfect arcs. Most eye-catching of all, however, was the 50 Rege stuffed bear she held close to her chest. Though it was large enough to draw attention, it didn't look out of place in the arms of such a girl as her. Please, my lady, forgive me." In response to the girl's tirade, the boy miserably sputtered excuses and breathlessly pled for leniency as he summoned his remaining strength to pick up the pace. After a not insubstantial trip, the two finally arrived at the ship's boarding gate. "May I please see your invitation and boarding passes?" the crew member working at the gate asked, smiling politely. Up close, the ship was even more opulent, a prized possession of the Verne Company. Its main route was between Remeferia and the Calvard Republic via Lamelin Bay. From this particular trip, the entire ship had been reserved by one Haldor Barn, a wealthy merchant from the Calvard. Passengers hoping to board required both a standard boarding pass as well as an explicit invitation from Mr. Barn himself. However, as each invitation included the room information for the guest in question, the boarding pass was strictly a formality. Oh man, there's a bunch of stuff that you forget that keeps coming up. Oh, good to see a 000. "Gray," the girl called to the boy by name and gestured with her hand, implicitly ordering him to present their credentials. "Yes, my lady. What do you require of me?" the boy asked, having completely failed to grasp his employer's unspoken instruction. "You cannot possibly be this dense, you stupid worm," she snapped. "Oh, I'm sorry, my lady. I beg your forgiveness." Cowering before the young lady's vicious glare, the boy stuttered and stammered 1,000 apologies. "Silence! The invitation and boarding pass. Now?" "Right, my lady." The boy began busily rustling through the contents of the suitcase, frantically searching for the requisite papers. Yet his haste quickly proved to be his downfall, for no sooner had he located the pass than suddenly a gust of wind blew past, tearing the paper from his hand. "Oh no!" he exclaimed. The boy instinctively threw his arms out, stretching them to their physical limit, but his efforts were in vain. The boarding pass fluttered down to the bottom of the harbor, coming to rest gently on the water's surface. As though that wasn't bad enough, misfortune continued to hound the boy as a number of silhouettes swiftly appeared beneath the waterlogged document. A school of fish jumped into the air with a splash, spraying water all about. They then descended back into the harbor's depths, taking the hapless butler's boarding pass along with them. "God, no!" The boy's grief-stricken cry resonated throughout the harbor. Trembling with fear, he turned to face his master, prepared for an eruption of anger followed by a vicious tirade of abuse. Yet it did not immediately come. The girl simply stood there in silence. She stared long and hard at the boy, her face betraying no expression whatsoever. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. This was the calm before the storm. The boy began spitting out apologies, tripping over his words as his voice grew weaker by the second. Like a short-circuited radio warbling its death knell, his body seemed to shrink, and his shoulders slumped like a criminal awaiting judgment. "You're absolutely useless!" The girl's anger finally burst forth in a violent blast. Despite the ferocity of her exclamation, she managed to save enough breath to launch a sharp kick at the boy in the same moment. The well-aimed strike sent the boy flying farther than her petite frame would suggest was possible. He seemed to hang in the air for a brief moment before resuming his journey downward off the edge of the pier, reaching a frigid end as he broke through the water's surface with a splash. As soon as he returned to his senses, he began violently thrashing his arms about, pleading for aid between coughing up mouthfuls of cold water. "My lady, please help me!" he begged, his thrashing growing more desperate and frantic. "You're going to find that pass, and I mean now. You're not leaving that water until I see it in your hands." I can't swim," he burbled as his head began to slowly sink beneath the surface. "I'm well aware. Please, my..." His words were cut short as his lungs filled with water, and the rest of his head bobbed below the surface. His thrashing ceased, and silhouette grew faint as he quickly plummeted downward to the bottom of the bay. With the situation having reached its unacceptable level of risk, several onlooking crew members ran over to rescue the waterlogged butler. The moment the boy made it out of the bay, however, the still enraged girl tried to kick him right back in again. "Miss, please, you must calm down. The crew members at the gate said, the crew member at the gate trying to pacify the young noble. How can I be calm about this? My father was unable to attend, so here I am in his place. There are important business discussions taking place on this ship that I cannot afford to miss. And now, thanks to a certain someone's rank incompetence, that's exactly what's going to happen." The girl gave the boy a menacing glare so virulent it could have stripped the paint from an entire vessel. "Tell me, worm, how exactly are you going to take responsible for me being unable to board?" Oh, those pictures. Though the boy was still coughing and violently spewing water, his already pallid face managed to lose what little color remained upon it, hearing those words. Feeling pity for the boy, the gate attendant stepped in. "Well, for the time being, may I see your invitation instead?" The boy moved to comply with this request, but stopped dead in the tracks by the girl's menacing scowl. She produced the invitation herself and roughly shoved it at the attendant. The attendant read over the paper and went through the list of names in the guest list. "This invitation is for Baron Chris Reinhardt, who I can confirm is indeed on the guest list." Oh, that's the attendant, huh? "Might I presume that you are his daughter and attendant?" "You presume correctly. I am Baron Reinhardt's eldest daughter, Celia Reinhardt." Reinhardt. Finkel and Einhardt. Reinhardt. That is Claire's. That's Claire's family name, isn't it? Or am I mistaken? The gate attendant made a respectful bow before continuing to speak. "Then there will be no need to further concern yourself with the matter of the boarding pass, Mr. Reinhardt. You may proceed." Oh, Rivelt. Okay, you're right. Darn it, I'm trying to connect dots and I'm rusty. "Oh, we may? Strictly speaking, a decision of this nature required approval from a higher-ranking employee, but in this case the gate attendant decided that swift action was the best way to provide a peaceful solution to the rapidly worsening situation at hand. "It seems as though you'll live to writhe another day, you useless worm. Count yourself lucky." The girl boarded the ship, still staring icy daggers at her butler. He dragged their luggage on after her, still wheezing and dripping wet from the events of the past few minutes. He effusively expressed his gratitude to the gate attendant as he passed, receiving a sympathetic smile and a few words of encouragement. "There'll be enough, Dots. These just ain't it. Okay." Having finally boarded the ship, the two youths immediately headed for their rooms. Their pace was quick, as though they already knew the way, and not a single word was exchanged between them as they briskly walked down the halls. "I have a feeling this was all a ruse." Once they arrived, they gave the room a quick yet thorough search. "Infiltration complete." "Yep." The girl broke her silence, suddenly speaking in a sleepy drawl. Her eyelids drooped and she laid out a mighty yawn, not a trace remaining on the tense, high-handed young lady from only a few moments ago. "I am beat. Think I'm gonna take a nap." She tossed her plush bear onto the bed and immediately launched herself after it. She dove under the covers with a childlike exuberance befitting someone her age, perhaps even younger. In contrast to her whimsical new demeanor, the boy remained completely expressionless. "Don't let your guard down. The real mission begins now." His voice was alarmingly calm and terse. As he brushed aside his bangs, still wet from the frigid water of the harbor, his now visible eyes were cold and sharp. Beneath that, however, was a gleam of a hunter fixed on its prey. Each and every ridge of his body exuded composure. The flustered, stammering butler from before was nothing but a memory. Though the girl's transformation was strange, the boy's sudden shift in personality was nothing short of jarring. "That wasn't really your best work out there, S. Far from it." She spoke nonchalantly, rolling around the bed as she critiqued the boy's performance. He remained silent for a moment before speaking, almost as though he agreed with her assessment, at least in part. "It didn't affect the mission." But you overdid each and every reaction. It's not easy to match that without seeming unnatural, you know? You hemming it up out there made us stand out more than we needed to." Despite her words, the girl's heartfelt tone took the bite out of her criticisms. These were the duo's true personalities. The upper-class young lady and her bumbling butler making a spectacle at the boarding gate were simply elaborate pageantries, acts necessary for gaining entry into the ship and nothing more. Any other method of infiltration might have raised suspicion, endangering their mission. Thus they chose to board under false identities. They had made clever use of an organization's network beforehand, ascertaining which of the invitees would be unable to attend. Armed with this bit of intel, they created their personas. The invitations required for boarding were printed on high-quality paper, but ultimately differed only in name. Using the same layout of each infiltration, the same layout for each invitation was the logical choice for a merchant looking to pinch Mira wherever possible. Logical or not, that particular decision made the necessary forgery a walk in the park. The boarding pass, on the other hand, was a different story. The Verne Company was known to employ cutting-edge technology to perform forgeries. Attempting to use fake pass to board was an act accompanied by considerable amount of risk. This is why the two engineered the dramatic performance that took place at the boarding gate. The boy dropped the boarding pass was, of course, an intentional act. Both the gust of wind and timely group of fish were the result of a battle orbment the girl had kept hidden in her stuffed bear, a clever method she used many times from the past to cast arts unnoticed. All of their hard work had paid off. Their infiltration had gone exactly according to Keikaku. It was yet another successful operation for a boy known as the 3 of Swords, and the girl known as the 9 of Swords, in their life of professional assassins. To be continued. Right now! Okay, well that was fun first chapter. I hope you guys are comfortable. Is this working for everybody? Y'all are good with this? All right, cool. Let's keep on keeping on then. Chapter 2, 3 and 9. At its scheduled time, the ship departed. As he watched the shoreline shrink into the distance, 3 of Swords spoke in a cold, flat voice. Target presence confirmed. We have pinpointed the enemy's positioning. Have we? Is our route prepared? Yep, we're good to go. The young girl, known as 9 of Swords, stood behind the boy, answering in a relaxed drawl, the polar opposite of her partner's icy tone. Having been dispatched by the organization, the two laid the groundwork for their mission, the assassination of the man responsible for this voyage, the wealthy merchant, Haldor Barn. The organization was not particular about how they dealt with their targets, whether in swift silence or via raucous violence. Their only real concern was making sure that they did not draw the attention of the Bracer Guild or the local police. As a hard rule, 3 and 9 would always select the most efficient method available to them. In this case, their mission was to prevent the ship from arriving in Calvard with Haldor still alive on it. Haldor had strong ties with Heue, a sizable criminal organization in the Republic. Should he safely make it to his destination and take refuge under their protection, his extraction and subsequent elimination would prove an exceptionally difficult task. Aside from the engine area, the ship had 3 main floors. The lowest housed a considerable number of general passengers. Naturally, this is where 3 and 9's rooms were located. The second floor contained a hall used for parties, banquets, and meals, as well as other such events. Finally, the third floor featured luxury rooms prepared specifically for the noble use. At present, however, the entirety of the floor was reserved by Haldor, who was enjoying the comforts of the room in the farthest back. 3 and 9 put their equipment and tools in order and then sprang into action. Their plan was to head to the hall on the second floor, but not before leaving a little gift on the first. The hall would be packed with passengers once the dinner service began. Given that only the ultra-wealthy and those with noble status were in attendance, the menu was likely to be suitably extravagant. Yet once they arrived, they found that Haldor had not elected to appear. An act of caution, perhaps? This was expected, however, and the two took their planned positions in a central area of the room. It's time. 3's quiet murmur was immediately followed by the din of an explosion from the floor below. The passengers began to panic, but their fear slowly subsided to uneasiness as security personnel deployed and headed to the floor to investigate the situation. In truth, the explosion had been caused by a small makeshift bomb that 3 and 9 had planted in an unoccupied room. The blast wasn't particularly powerful, but it was enough to ignite a number of small fires in the area. Their goal was to lure out security, and in that regard the bomb had more than served its purpose. The plan was progressing apace. "Guess I'm up," 9 said in her usual lackadaisical drawl. She gathered the edges of her skirt and her hands in her hands and gently swayed it back and forth, resulting in a number of black spheres thudding down to the floor. A series of muffled pops reverberated throughout the hall, heralding a smoke cloud of smoke and tear gas that quickly filled the room.
What's going on? I can hardly breathe.
My eyes are tearing up.
The gas was especially strong and would have lasting effects on it. Wasn't especially strong and would have no lasting effects on its victims. However, it was more than enough to send the already uneasy group of elites into a full-blown panic. 3 and 9 then began the next stage of their plan, their infiltration of the third floor. Currently, the bulk of security was on the first floor, meaning they would have to pass all the way through the second in order to respond to any emergencies at the top of the ship. The large number of panicking passengers on the second floor wouldn't stall security for long, but the situation would still buy 3 and 9 the time they would need. So far, the assassin's plan had gone flawlessly. Still, that didn't mean killing Haldor would be easy once they reached him. The two hid themselves in a stairwell on the third floor and scouted ahead. 2 more there. From what I can see, it looks like we'll have 5 to deal with, Nine shared her observations with 3 in a hushed tone. He silently nodded in acknowledgement. One look at the men standing guard ahead was enough to tell them that they were neither typical passengers nor ship security. They were well armed and their combat experience was practically carved into their hardened faces. Ex-Jaegers, huh? It was clear they had been hired not to protect the general guests, but to personally attend Haldor. Given that the room was located in the very back of the ship, it meant that their only way to reach him was through the battle-hardened veterans that currently barred 3 and 9's path forward. Avoiding a fight simply wasn't in the cards this time. I'll take the lead. As she said this, 9 began to casually walk forward, her posture relaxed. She made no attempt to hide her approach. Even when the guards heard her soft footsteps and turned to look, they didn't register her as a threat, an advantage afforded by her candy-sweet exterior.
Little lady, you're not allowed up here without permission,
one of the guards said in a gravelly voice. Yeah, we know there's been some kind of disturbance downstairs, another chimed in, but this ain't an evacuation site. Get yourself back to your room. Their tone was a bit harsh, but considering they used to be ex-Jaegers, their attitude toward 9 was almost amicable. She gestured toward Haldor's room. But I want to go in there. Pretty please? 9 wasn't putting on the spoiled noble act she had used to sneak aboard the ship earlier that day. This was probably as close to her genuine, sleepy intonation as she would allow during a mission.
You want to meet with Mr. Haldor, do ya? Well, today ain't your lucky day, kid, 'cause they got strict orders not to let anyone in this room.
And there's nothing I can do to change your mind? 9 tilted her head as she spoke, her presence beginning to unnerve the guards.
Nope, nothing,
one of them finally responded. Oh, I see. That's really too bad. Despite her words, 9 didn't seem especially disappointed by their response. Taking her plush bear in hand, she suddenly thrust it out in front of her. There was a flash of silver and loud whoop sound followed by a thud as 2 guards collapsed to the ground. I'm just making up onomatopoeias now. Their necks had each been pierced by 2 needles, which had been tipped with poison, a specialty of 9's and her mainstay in combat. Ordinarily hidden within the bear, the needles could be used to quickly disperse various types of poison, through a target's body when thrown at a vital point. 9 would typically carry up to 10 types of poisons, each suitable for different situations, depending on the circumstances. She would even use poison-free needles on occasion. This time, 9 had struck the 2 bodyguards with neurotoxin that robbed the body of its ability to freely move. While not strong enough to kill, it was definitely enough to immobilize someone who was substantial in size for a good while.
What the?
Having sensed something amiss, one of the remaining bodyguards down the hallway turned to see what was happening. The writers of 60s Batman would be proud. You're not wrong. Pow! Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a figure quickly moving in his direction. Before he could figure out what was happening, however, a blade flashed before his eyes, and he was on the ground incapacitated, along with his comrades. The swift takedown was executed by 3. He wielded a longsword with a thin blade that appeared sharp enough to cut the very air around it. Its construction resembled that of a traditional Eastern sword, albeit with a straight blade instead of the typical curved one. Its design was surprisingly ornate, and curiously enough, it seemed to be missing a hilt guard and the part of the blade near its base. and part of the blade near its base. Oh, like a little, notch cutout, I guess? The two remaining bodyguards had seen what happened, and they each already dropped into a fighting stance. No matter how youthful their opponents, it was clear they had no intention of pulling their punches.
You little bastards!
Yelled one of them as he began swinging his axe downward. Three met the attack with his sword, locking the assassin and bodyguard in place. Seeing an opening, the other bodyguard drew his sword and attempted to stab Three. While still holding the axe in place with his right hand, Three quickly drew a short sword with his left, using it to deflect the second bodyguard's attack in one clean motion. The sword resembled a longsword in nearly all aspects but length. Unlike the longsword, it had a hilt guard. However, it seemed incomplete somehow, as though it was missing a piece. It was much less of an offensive weapon than with the longsword being used mainly for defense. Despite its best efforts to fend off the attackers, it seemed as though Three would be quickly overpowered. Even for him, it was difficult to hold back the weight of an attack from a grown man with only his right hand. Sensing that he needed to do something quickly, Three intentionally stopped pushing back on the axe, deflecting it harmlessly to the side. With his remaining strength, he whipped around to face his staggering assailant and plunged his short sword deep into his torso. Hey, Hollow Man. I just started this today, but as far as the audiobook started about half hour ago, maybe? I don't know. The other bodyguards quickly launched a flurry of attacks, but Three pushed the critically wounded axe wielder into his comrade. The sword-wielding bodyguard was momentarily taken off guard, and Three capitalized on the opening, cutting him down with both swords. Right, that should be... Three turned to notify Nine that the guards had all been dispatched, but as he did, he saw the door open to the VIP room behind her. Out stepped another ex-Jaeger, weapon drawn, his sights on attacking the defenseless Nine, while her guard was down. Too much space separated them for Three to warn Nine in time. He pushed off his back heel with all of his might, but stopped his dash a split second later, as did the final bodyguard.
My, you're pretty sharp. I was wondering how long it would take for you to catch on.
Wait, who said that? To catch on? Nine turned lazily on her heel and cast a derisive... Oh, okay, that was Nine talking. My, you're pretty sharp. I was wondering how long it'd take for you to catch on. Nine turned lazily on her heel and cast a derisive glance over her shoulder. Her expression remained unfazed as thin red stripes appeared over the Jaeger's arms and legs, blood beginning to trickle out like sanguine tears. Better not move. Wriggle too much and you'll be leaving in more pieces than you arrived. Her sweet appearance made her remarks all the more disconcerting and ghastly. The ex-Jaeger understood that this was no empty threat. He truly couldn't afford to take another step. The cause of his painful predicament was a web of superfine steel threads surrounding him. Thanks to their special processing, the threads were roughly as sharp as a drawer full of top-end kitchen knives. Nine had laid a trap outside the door, one that an unassuming person would have been hard-pressed to detect with the naked eye. Any unfortunate soul who had tried to pass through the area with any degree of speed would have soon found themselves the centerpiece of a grisly, blood-splattered tableau. The threads were connected to specially designed needles Nine had used as her main weapon. Such thread was notoriously difficult to use, and it was rarely regarded as being sufficiently powerful to use as one's only means of attack. While there were rumors of true masters who needed no other implements in order to eliminate their targets, Nine had yet to attain such a level of skill with them. Is this, are these like the threads that, what's her name, the maid used? Anyways, Nine had yet to attain such a level of skill with them. That said, she was still a menace in her own right, and fiendishly clever master of traps besides, as the Jaeger had just learned. Yes, Sharon, that's the one. 9 tossed a poisoned needle at her immobilized foe with minimal effort, and her hapless victim collapsed to the floor. She tilted her head to the side and noticed 3 staring at her.
What? Is something wrong, S?
As she asked, using the nickname preferred to be called. She preferred to call 3 by. She would often refer to herself as In, which 3 took as a shorthand version of 9, but when she spoke with 3, she would use S instead of T. He had assumed it to be short for swords, despite the word being part of both their names, but had never bothered to ask. Nothing at all, 3 tersely responded as he turned to face the VIP room door. At last, the pair stepped into the room, housing their target, Haldor Barn. To be continued. Chapter 3. The Assassins and the Target. Yeah, I wonder. If 3. I wonder if she is. Could she be? I mean, we don't know a timeline yet. But I'm thinking either she is tangentially related to Sharon, or maybe it is Sharon. We don't know. Yet. Inside the room was opulence made manifest. Yeah, this would have to be something before the events of Cold Steel, because these are books that you would find within Cold Steel, right? I'm getting ready, Quets, for Reverie. Yeah, we'll get to Daybreak someday. So yeah, these books were collectible within Cold Steel, so these have to have happened before the events of Cold Steel, so it's possible that 9. Yeah, that 9 is Sharon, maybe, or someone connected. Similar weapon. Chapter 3. The Assassins and the Target. Inside the room was opulence made manifest, the best of the best, enough to make the wealthiest noble envious. In its center of its spacious layout sat Haldor Barn, reclined on a sofa. He brought a glass of wine to his lips as his features twisted into a wry, unpleasant expression.
Absolute incompetence. Such a simple job, and yet apparently one completely beyond them.
Mr. Barn had fully grasped the situation. He had given the order that no one be allowed in, but there were now 2 children standing before him. Given the commotion outside, it had been easy to guess what happened. Though their appearance made it hard to believe, the 2 standing before him were no doubt professional assassins, here for his life. Still, Haldor maintained his composure. He kept his realization hidden, refusing to allow so much of a hint of panic to creep into his features. The source of his confidence was a certain colossal machine that sat on the floor before him. Its mere presence made even the impossibly spacious room feel cramped. It towered over 2 arge in height, with 6 spider-like legs protruding from its body. Its humanoid upper half stood erect with 4 menacing arms stretched out from it. The entire machine emitted an eerie glow, making for a most intimidating sight to behold.
Wowee, that's a big one,
9 remarked, glancing up at it. An archaism, 3 exclaimed, immediately shifting to a battle stance.
This beauty's new favorite of mine. A rather fruitful find at the recent back alley auction I happened to attend, and it wasn't cheap, let me tell you. But no, I didn't stop there. I'm a man who doesn't do things by half measures. I paid precisely a princely sum to have it outfitted with the most cutting-edge technology available. Mere well spent, in my opinion. I dare say it has enough firepower to easily wipe out an entire platoon of soldiers if I wanted to. In fact, it'd be mere child's play.
Barely able to contain his smug grin, Haldor looked like a boastful child showing off his most expensive toy at school.
So the bums outside were just the bouncers then, and the monstrosity is what's...
Oh. 3. So the bums outside were just bouncers then, and this monstrosity is what's actually here to protect you, 3 deduced.
Ah, sharp one. That's precisely correct, Haldor said gleefully. As long as I have it by my side, my safety here is guaranteed, and once I make it to the Republic, I'll be untouchable.
He let out a laugh, his voice rising high and echoing endlessly throughout the gaudy chamber. Shockingly stupid. He really is an idiot, huh? The duo's comments weren't born from simple overconfidence, even if they had somehow fail in their mission, and even if Haldor had somehow managed to make it to Heiyue territory, he had already been marked for death by the organization. They would pursue him to the bitter end. To the last man, he had 0 chance of survival. Attack! At Haldor's order,
Attack!
At Haldor's order, the archaism lurched into action. It set its heights on 3, charging straight for him. 9 took the opportunity to begin casting her arts. While her partner specialized in close quarters combat, she was a force to be reckoned with when it came to the orbital arts. As she began to charge, however, one of the archaism's arms rapidly folded into a gun. The muzzle pointed in 9's direction. Without delay, it sprayed a hail of bullets at her. Whoa! 9 evaded the gunfires by a hair's breadth, but was forced to abandon her casting her art. The archaism focused its attention back on 3, who was busy fending off its melee attacks with its longsword. 9 sprinted into the other side of the room and started her cast again. The machine's aim wasn't too adept, however, and she found herself unable to escape its she found herself unable to escape it long enough to get an art off. It appeared that their foe was equipped with a powerful arts detection sensor, one that allowed it to identify incoming orbital attacks and counter before it could be launched. Forced it to abandon her casting yet again, 9 screwed her face in frustration and sullenly gripped her plush bear. This thing doesn't play nice. I quit, she said in a huff. It was a fair point. Poison-tipped needles wouldn't have been particularly effective against the steel plating of a machine, and without the ability to cast her arts, 9 found herself at a loss. 3, however, remained unperturbed and readied himself for another onslaught. I'm gonna grab a little shut-eye. Wake me up when the fighting's over, okay? 9 said as she flopped down on one of the room's sofas, using her bear as a pillow. 9! Cut it out! I need you awake! 3 shouted from across the room. Despite this, 9 didn't react at all. As she dozed, the archaism seemed to disregard her as a threat fully. Solely focused its attention on 3. Its 4 arms transformed into a sword, a lance, an axe, and a gun, proceeded to launch a relentless string of attacks at already overwhelmed assassin. 3 leapt out of the way at the machine's leapt out of the way as the machine's sword arm cut through an arc through the air, only to then see the lance rocketing toward him. He narrowly avoided it, but his escape path was blocked by a mighty swing of the axe. Meanwhile, the archaism had its gun trained on Haldor's direction. Even in the heat of combat, it prioritized protecting its master against any approaching threats. Swift movements and deft swordplay were the foundation of 3's combat style, but they were little use against such a powerful machine. The archaism was simply too fast, and its attacks were both explosively powerful and aimed with deadly precision. Further, its legs afforded it the perfect balance, and its multiple arms allowed it to launch attacks faster than 3 could keep up. To his irritation, 3 found his skill set completely useless against the metal monstrosity. Sure, he was a better fit for the task than 9, but only by a slim margin. Regardless, he continued to fight, both blades flashing as he moved to intercept his foe. The sheer number of attacks coming at him forced 3 to focus entirely on defense. He parried, dodged, and deflected the relentless wave of strikes, biding his time, waiting for the machine to leave an opening for him to strike with his longsword. The violent dance continued on for some time. 3 had managed to land a number of blows to the machine's body and arms, but had resulted in no more than a metallic twang as his blade was repelled by the solid metal armor.
It's no use, child. The armor's specially commissioned, and your pathetic little butter knives don't have a snowball's chance in Gehenna against them.
Haldor's mocking tone grated on 3's nerves. It was made worse by the fact that it was clear he wasn't lying. 3's attacks had been completely ineffective so far. Still, 3 had yet to suffer any wounds. Given how things were going, though, it was only a matter of time before he was slowly worn down. Analysis complete. 9 suddenly began speaking, apparently having woken up from her nap, still lounging on the sofa. She continued, her voice flatter and more precise than usual. Arms, joint, 1. Down 5 rij. Legs, joint, 2. Up 3 rij. Waist, rotation, axis, center. Left side chest, up 2/5. Left 1/5. The first to respond was not 3, but Haldor.
You little wench, how did you know that?
He was flustered, clearly shook that 9 had figured out the archaism's structural weak point. 9 slowly rose from the sofa and reverted back to her usual drawl, sleepily rubbing her eyes as she spoke. I could tell by the sound. It takes a bit of concentration, though. Pure disbelief was etched into Haldor's face. 3, on the other hand, looked as composed as ever. He had known from the start that not what 9 was doing. He was simply buying time until the analysis was complete.
S, now!
Right. 3 readied himself as she rushed the archaism, his swordplay swifter than ever. A veritable tornado of slashes and stabs. Each of his attacks hit upon one of the weak points that 9 had pointed out. He suddenly switched to his short sword and performed the same volley of attacks, hitting each point a second time, but the result was the same as before. Nothing save the high-pitched metallic sound rang out with each hit. It didn't appear that the archaism had been damaged in the slightest. Haldor was beside himself with laughter, relishing watching the young assassin struggle.
What a joke! You can swing those little swords of yours until the palms come home. But you're never getting through that armor.
All part of the process. Letting the simple reply linger in the air, 3 lined up his short sword with the empty section of the base of the long sword, the 2 blades locked into place, becoming a single weapon, their sharp edges lining up perfectly. At first glance, it would be difficult to tell that that the 2 were ever anything other than a single sword. Haldor watched the process with interest, but then burst into mocking laughter a moment later.
Proud of your little pocket knife, boy? Do you honestly think that'll be your ticket to victory?
Truth be told, even in its combined state, the reach of the weapons of the 3's sword hadn't improved any, nor was the weapon sharper or faster. The slightly increased weight of the blade may have provided some increase in power, but certainly not enough to break through the archaism's thick armor. Given the opponent at hand, the weapon truly seemed little better than a toy. 3 chose to remain silent and let his weapon do the talking. He swung it at the peak of the point of the archaism's leg, the same spot he had targeted before. This time, however, his strike followed by a loud explosion, and the archaism legs flew across the room. The blast seemed to have come from within the archaism itself, and was powerful enough to have blown its limb clean off. At a glance, it seemed similar to a firearm-related art, but neither 3 nor 9 had appeared to have cast anything. Even if they had, the archaism's sensor would have surely detected it.
What the?
Haldor stammered, his face twisted with shock and fear. Another swing by 3's sword, followed by another explosion. A second of the archaism's limbs were sent flying into the corner of the room.
What in the hell is going on?
Haldor screeched, no longer trying to hide his panic, his tone quickly deteriorating from alarm to abject terror. This is no ordinary sword, 3 began to speak, with his face devoid of expression. It's fully integrated with a battle orb and forming a single weapon. Well, Strictly speaking, I suppose it's closer to an ordinary orbment than a battle orbment. The location and timing and specifics were complicated, as was the use of a specialized orbment in conjunction with some automated processing. The end result was an instantaneous cast time. However, its wielder was skilled enough. If the wielder was skilled enough, they'd be able to launch powerful attacks without the need for any charge-up period. It was in this ability that the true value of Three's weapon lay.
But
Having suffered an enormous amount of damage from the rapid art strikes unleashed upon it, the archaism began throwing sparks in all directions. It began to dawn on Haldor that victory was no longer an option for him, and he began desperately looking for a means of escape.
Stop fighting and get me out of here now!
He ordered the archaism in a shrill yell. Reacting to its new orders, the machine quickly rotated its torso, began moving toward him. I don't think so. I don't think so, a lazy voice called out from across the room. During the commotion, its remaining spider-like legs had been bound with a complex web of steel thread, rendering it immobile. This is the end. Three quickly struck the remaining weak points in rapid succession. The resulting series of explosions tore the machine to pieces, littering its surroundings with burnt steel and charred components. When the smoke had cleared, the room was so filled with broken parts that it was more scrapyard than sweet. What remained of the archaism's body ceased all function and collapsed, its chassis mangled beyond recognition. Three deftly wove his way through the junk scattered at his feet, silently moving toward Haldor.
Stay back!
It's gotta be a pitiful squeak.
Stay back!
A pitiful squeak escaped from Haldor's throat as he scrambled backwards, away from the approaching assassin. There was nowhere to run. However, Three's mission was nearing its end, yet he didn't feel happiness or even relief. He took a step closer. He felt his swords suddenly grow heavy in his hand. He forced himself to take another step. His legs felt like they were encased in concrete. His whole body felt like it was desperately rejecting his advance, trying to pull itself away. Another step. This was how it always ended. All that remained was for him to fulfill his role. He was nothing but a tool, a machine. This was how it was supposed to be. Three took one final step forward.
There's no need to share any detail.
There's no need to share any details with you. Still, I figure you at least deserve to know who's ending your life. To know Three thought of himself whose name... To know Three thought to himself whose name to curse as you burn in the fires of Gehenna. I am Three of Swords. He plunged his blade deep into Haldor's chest, piercing the man's heart. I'm an assassin for the organization. By this point, the panic on the second floor had largely subsided, and the ship's security guards were finally starting to move up to the third floor. Picking up on this, 3 and 9 quickly broke open the window and jumped through it out to the sea outside. It's a good thing this mission wasn't on an airship. That would have made escaping it way more of a pain, 9 remarked. Agreed. She was right. Escaping from an airship would have necessitated a specialized aircraft for the operation, as well as forcing the two to leap from the ship mid-air. It wouldn't have been entirely impossible for the young assassins, though, and surely someone in their wide world carried out such an operation before. 9 softly called out to 3 again, using her preferred nickname for him. He was a corrupt man, an evil man. The two of them looked back at the ship. There was no need for further explanation between the two. Yeah, 3 said quietly. I know. He had been thorough in reading through the mission dossier and knew that 9 spoke true. Haldor was a bastard through and through, one that had performed all kinds of horrible acts in the pursuit of Mira. His mere existence sullied the world, and society was better off with him no longer a part of it. Not that it matters either way. When it came down to it, a hit was a hit. A target could be the person of the past with the purest of heart on the continent, or the scummiest bottom feeder imaginable. If an assassination order came from the organization, 3 and 9 followed it. That's how it always was. I guess. 9 went silent. She shook something out from her plush bear and began blowing into it. It gradually took the shape of an inflatable raft big enough for one. 9 climbed aboard and flopped down, once again using her bear as a pillow. I'm gonna catch another few winks. I'll leave this part to you. Okay? This part meant for 3 to swim them both to shore. Your legs work just fine, he retorted. Do it yourself. Despite his words, 3 felt a twinge of something resembling affection in his heart. He and 9 had been operating together for over a year by this point. She was a little younger than him and sometimes found himself thinking of her as little more than thinking of her more as a little sister than just his partner. The unnatural rapport aside, she was also someone he could truly rely on during their missions. Despite this, 3 understood the situation. He understood that even if 9 was his partner, even if he thought of her as a little sister, he could never let his guard down. He could never truly trust her. You know, Sharon has kind of a sleepy-sounding voice, doesn't she? Chapter 4. 3 of Swords. They hunt me relentlessly. All of the people I've murdered over the years. I've cut off their heads, carved their hearts from their chests, sliced their torsos right through the middle, but no matter what I do, an army of corpses continues to pursue me. I see them every time I close my eyes, the politicians, the nobles, the merchants, the rich and the powerful. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone! I frantically swing my sword at them. I cut and cut, bisecting them, slashing them apart, but they don't relent. Chunks of flesh and bone, viscera, intestines, lungs, and brains. They gather into a writhing mass that comes crashing down on me like a gory wave, threatening to swallow me whole. Get away, get away, get away! I try to escape, but they corner me again and again, my victims staring me at with their hollow eyes, accusing me. How could you do this to us? How? They throw themselves at me, decaying fingers gripping my neck, trying to rip the life right out of me just as I did to them. Let me go, let me go, let me go, let me go! I frantically thrash and struggle, but no matter what I do, I can't break away. Rotting blood and bile trickles down my body, dissolving my skin. The wave finally swallows me. I just want a normal life. I just want my humanity back. I woke from my nightmare, my breath short and ragged. My entire body was soaked in horrible sweat. I fought back the rising urge to vomit. The night after completion of a mission was always like this. The only difference was seeing one more face in the crowd. Even after years, my disgust for murder had never abated, not even in the slightest. No matter how much time passed, I couldn't rid myself of the scars left in my mind and the terrible acts I'd performed, and yet I had no choice but to continue. 9 and I were nothing but tools. Our individual thoughts and ideals had no meaning. They were completely unnecessary. All of the organization's actions required from us were skillful capacity for murder and unquestioning subordination, to kill as we were ordered to. Our entire existence boiled down to this singular point. To reject an order or attempt to escape was tantamount to suicide. The organization, to even speak its true name, was forbidden. It was a group of professional killers that existed in the shadows of society. Its core business was eliminating marks, but its true objective likely lay elsewhere. As a low-ranking member, I simply was one of the organization's weapons. There was no reason for such info to be shared with me. Most members of the organization had served it since they were children. Children deemed to possess special potential were made to undergo combat instruction and exercises in a place known as the factory. The majority of the children who entered the facility would never again see beyond its walls. Unable to endure the merciless training they were put through, it would become their tomb. The lucky ones who did survive, however, were officially recognized as entry-level members of the organization. That's what happened to me. I was forced to abandon who I was when I first passed through the factory's doors at 7 years old. Anyone who dared utter the former name would be subject to severe punishment. There was no concept of individuality. Life in the organization meant being nothing more than another tool in an arsenal. It wasn't until I graduated at the age of 10 that I was given a name. It only served to solidify my status as a weapon, however. Our names, more like titles, are based on tarot cards. In my case, the moniker I received from the minor arcana Three of Swords, it didn't have even the slightest bit of humanity to it, but it was better than having no name at all. Both the higher-ups and small faction at the very best candidates were given a name based on the major arcana. Everyone who survived training and made it in was skilled, but in terms of combat ability, the major arcana could run circles around the rest of us. Rumor had it they were even more powerful than the top-ranked bracers. Joker? Campanella? Did Campanella have a name based on a tarot arcana? That's it, the Fool. Thank you. Rumor had it they were even more powerful than top-ranked bracers. I left my room and peeked into the neighboring one. It seemed like 9 was still sleeping. It was time for my report, so I headed out on my own. Lower-level members of the organization generally operated in pairs. My partner is 9 of Swords, a girl 1 year my junior. 9 was a natural genius. She graduated from the factory in a single year, despite the fact that the average kid takes 3 to 5, if they made it out of graduation without dropping out, that is. From gathering info to analyzing battle situations, acting abilities to infiltration tactics, she was a top class in a multitude of fronts. That's to say nothing of her combat style, which made use of needles and thread, allowing her to control the field of battle and dominate her foes. All in all, her abilities were far better suited to assassinations than mine were. It was a bit awkward for us when we were first paired up, but after working together for a year, I could honestly say she was the best partner I had ever had, and the most reliable. At the same time, she was also the person I needed to regard with the most caution. The reasons why the organization used a partner system were twofold. The obvious reason was that it helped facilitate missions, but it also forced each partner to monitor the other. In the organization, betrayal was swiftly returned with death. A tool is doomed to serve until it breaks. As such, we were expected to be part of the organization the entirety of our lives. As a general rule, we were afforded no freedom. There did, however, exist special rules. If one were to sense that their partner was scheming to betray the organization, they could sell them out to gain their own freedom. All you had to do was make your report, present sufficient evidence of your suspicion, and then you were given the task of eliminating them yourself. If you succeeded, you were free. Simply running away meant resigning yourself to looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. The organization had eyes everywhere. Everyone who wanted true freedom was better off waiting for the chance to turn their partner in. There was another problem too. The worst of the worst would actually fabricate proof of their partner's betrayal in order to in an effort to earn their own freedom. Thus, the person you needed to regard most cautiously was not an enemy you'd face on any mission, but the partner who was always at your side. You needed to entertain and accept the notion that you could be betrayed at any time. Members did not turn their backs on the organization. This was an absolute requirement for survival, and a lesson that I learned very early on through personal experience. 3 years ago, I tried to escape. Well, I suppose it was more of a we than I. At the time, I partnered with another boy, one known as Ace of Swords. Ace was a year my senior, and he was a pretty good guy. We got along well enough, and he quickly grew into an older brother figure for me. He wielded a giant sword with ease, one as long as he was tall, and he used it both to destroy our enemies and protect me. He really was an ace when it came to battle. In that sense, his name couldn't have been more appropriate. One thing Ace and I shared was contempt for the murder. For the murders we were forced to perform. I can't remember how the idea of escaping the organization came up initially, but I do recall that neither of us objected to it. As I mentioned, the system was set up to prevent individual members from betraying the organization, as they could be sold out by their partner. We figured the best way to arrange that was to simply work together and escape the organization as a team. With our objective decided on, we began planning in earnest. We quickly decided we didn't need to execute our plan as far away from the other pairs of assassins employed by the organization, or that we would need to. The first part of the plan went well enough. We entered Erebonia, thinking that its considerable distance from our normal area of operations meant we could enjoy a certain degree of safety. That was a severe misjudgment on our part, though. The organization had eyes there as well. We were approached by other pairs of assassins twice, and both times ended with combat. We managed to fend them off, however. Ace and I were partners for a reason, and we fought well together. The third time, however, it was our overseer who paid us a visit. To say that his power was overwhelming wouldn't do it justice. It was like trying to fight a force of nature. We barely managed to escape with our lives, suffering heavy wounds in the process. With nowhere else to go, we huddled together in a cave, conscious of the fact that our next encounter with the overseer would surely be our last. There was nothing more to be said about the situation, and for what felt like an eternity, we passed the time in silence.
Hey, Ace?
I began speaking, believing that it would be the last conversation we'd ever have.
What's up, buddy? I just wanted to say that, all things considered, I think everything could have gone a lot worse.
What's that supposed to mean? He struggled through the pain to force out a little smirk at my comment.
Don't get me wrong, I have plenty of regrets, but still.
Ace waited in silence for me to continue.
Being by your side all this time, well, it's made my life so much better, Ace. And even if we're fated to meet our deaths here, it's a million times better than spending a lifetime just as another tool.
The fire flickered. Our shadows danced on the cave wall. Finally, Ace broke the silence, his voice a mere whisper.
3.
Thanks for everything, man.
You too, Ace. Thank you.
I had said what I needed to say. I felt as if our opponent were to arrive at that very moment. At least I'd be able to give my whole soul to the battle. But then,
if that's how you feel,
Ace started. Suddenly, the ambiance of the cave completely shifted. Like some horrible hallucination, Ace's icy voice pierced through me, chilling me to the bone.
Then die, buddy. Die for me.
My first reaction was a slight confusion. I actually interpreted it as a clumsy way of saying that we would face our deaths together. I turned to face him just to clarify, and what I saw next was Ace's massive sword speeding down toward my head. I immediately dodged his strike, and the ground where I had been laying only a moment ago had been shattered into rubble.
Ace, what are you doing?
I cried out. You can't figure it out on your own? Have you forgotten the final rule of those who betray the organization? The final rule. I hadn't forgotten it. I simply hadn't given it much thought. It seemed irrelevant to the situation, but then everything clicked into place then. When two partners betray the organization, the only way for one of them to gain its forgiveness was to kill their partner and present the organization with the corpse. The idea behind this rule was to force escapees into a sense of desperation, and then push them into killing each other, taking care of the problem so the organization didn't have to. To my absolute shock, this was precisely what Ace was trying to do. I understood what was happening, but all I could do was ask why, over and over.
Ace, why are you doing this?
You know, buddy, becoming partners with you was the only bit of luck I had in my whole goddess-damned life. I really did want to be free together, to get our humanity back together.
Then why are you?
Because I need to survive, he said, his voice dripping with desperation. I can't die like this. Screaming wildly, Ace swung his sword at me. The same sword that had been used to save my life more times than I could count was now being used in an attempt to end it. Just die, he screamed. I tried to scream back, but the horrible knot in my stomach and the storm of emotions in my heart ensured that the only thing that came out of my mouth was a meaningless warble that meant that I warble as I met his sword with my own. Engulfed in despair, I surrendered control to my instincts and engaged the enemy in combat as I would any other. I don't clearly remember what happened from there. All I know was that I was overtaken by rage and sadness and became a lashing, screaming monster. I was finally brought to my senses by the sound of Ace's body collapsing to the ground. That's how I managed to survive, how I won back my position as one of the organization's tools. And that's where I'd been ever since. Our escape was a deadly failure that laid bare my inadequacies. I still hadn't given up on winning back my humanity, but I'd be damned if I was going to trust anyone else ever again. It's a good book. I should get a hard copy of this one too. So we're on chapter 5. How many chapters are there? 10? Okay. Almost halfway. That's all right. Chapter 5. The Overseer and the Report. There was a hard copy in the collector's edition? Oh, then I probably... Oh, that's not it. That's Legends of Zemuria. There we go. Neat. I wonder, is this any different? Same, but black and white. Oh, and the title pages are different. I mean, kinda not. I think I opened it for an unboxing, but I didn't actually look through it. I just forgot that it existed. But maybe I should put it next to my hard copy, because I had a custom hardcover book made of Red Moon Rose. But yeah, that's cooler. All right. Chapter 5. The Overseer and the Report.
The town was practically empty, and the first rays of dawn were only just beginning to pierce the dark sky above. Stepping out of the inn, 3 inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the chilly air in an effort to dispel his drowsiness. The town, known as Luzent, was located on the border of Calvard and Remeferia. 3 and 9 would often undertake missions in both countries, making the centrally located town a perfect base of operations. East of the town was an official border crossing into Calvard. In stark contrast, wayward lay a mountain road known only to a select few. It was a treacherous path, to be sure, but also one that facilitated entry into the Republic without the need to go through the official channels. 3 headed to the designated rendezvous point, a small hill surrounded by weathered boulders. The site was deep within the mountains and therefore free of unwanted eyes. There he found a black silhouette waiting for him. It was a man hidden in shadow, wrapped in a tattered black cloak that obscured his face and body. Despite his bedraggled attire, his presence had an insurmountable weight to it, instilling a primal sort of fear into any who laid eyes on him. "I'm here to make my report," said 3. In response, the cloaked figure uttered only a single word.
Speak.
There we go. This man, known as the Overseer, was one of the higher-ranking members of the organization. He was given the name of Emperor from the Major Arcana, but those who served under him referred to him simply as the Overseer. As his title suggested, he watched over 3 and 9 and the rest of the organization's tools. He was the one who provided missions, instructions, and received their reports. 3 relayed the details of the Haldor mission to the Overseer. As he finished, the man spoke again.
Next.
Right. Regarding 9 of Swords. As part of their debriefing, every member was required to report their partner's activities. Each of the pair would separately describe what they did and what they observed their partner doing. Even the slightest discrepancy between the pair's report was regarded with suspicion. The objective behind this requirement was to instill with them a fear that any plot they may hatch to betray the organization would swiftly make its way to the ears of their superiors. "That is all," 3 said as he finished his report.
Very well.
The Overseer said.
You will be contacted with the instructions for your next mission once they are ready.
Understood. 3 turned to head back to town, but as he did, the Overseer spoke again. It was little more than a whisper, but it was delivered with a weight that froze 3 in his tracks.
Stop.
3 slowly turned around to face the Overseer. As always, his dark hood completely covered his face.
It has been 3 years now. You've not been designated anymore. You've not been designing any more plans, have you?
3 felt a sudden chill shoot down his spine. The Overseer's suffocating gaze was laced with a powerful malice. There was no need for 3 to ask for clarification. He knew the Overseer was talking about his escape attempt 3 years prior. The Emperor had personally conducted many of the organization's purges of runaway members. As their very lives became threatened, many lower-ranking members would find themselves overwhelmed by fear, rendering them powerless before the merciless Emperor. Thus, even within the organization, a cruel place in its own right, the Emperor had earned himself a reputation for his savagery. He was also the very same man who had tracked down 3 and Ace during their escape attempt. Had he already picked up on 3's new plan to escape? No,
3 found the thought absurd. He had taken every step with the utmost care and prudence. Further, if the Emperor had obtained some proof of three's wrongdoing, the young assassin would have already been dead. This was a test. If 3 wavered here, even the slightest, it would mean his end. I will never again attempt something so foolish. I am a tool of the organization, nothing more. My sole purpose is to take the lives of my targets. The way he cast his eyes, his calculated and practiced manner of speech, his natural breathing patterns, 3 had pulled it off to perfection. Silence hung heavy in the air between them for a moment. Finally, the Emperor spoke.
I do hope that is the case.
The murderous presence faded from the air, as did the tension that had been building in 3's chest.
There are certain expectations riding on your shoulders,
the Emperor said. I will fully devote myself to meeting them, 3 said, in the same practiced tone. He moved once more to return to town and was not stopped this time. He bought it. Back at his inn room, 3 let out a sigh of relief as he collapsed into his bed. Nothing had really happened during the exchange with the overseer, but nevertheless he felt completely drained. Without exception, each interaction he had with the overseer was psychologically exhausting. This was to be expected. However, as he was indeed hiding his true intentions from the organization. In truth, 3 had been planning a second escape attempt. The past 3 years had been grueling, but it did nothing to quash his fervent desire for freedom. If anything, his resolve to reclaim his humanity had only grown stronger by the day. However, each day also saw his blood-drenched hands growing yet heavier with sin. He was a mere tool, human in physical form only. What few shreds of humanity still remained in his heart he feared would be lost forever before much longer. Each new day that dawned could be the last that he finally slipped it could be the Each new day that dawned could be the day that he finally slipped away into being little more than a device, one whose only function was to assassinate. Put simply, a cold-hearted monster. That was the terrifying future he dreaded above all else. I absolutely need to succeed this time. I need to get out. His plan had 2 requirements he absolutely needed to meet in order to succeed. First off, he needed to avoid a direct confrontation with the overseer. Second, 9 could not find out about his plan. Regardless of the partnership, he had to be careful to avoid even giving the impression that he longed for freedom. Of course, this meant that 3 would be forced to abandon 9, someone who had fought by his side through countless life-or-death situations. The girl was even younger than he was, but for all her genius, there seemed to be something off about her. Nonetheless, whenever 3 thought about the moment he would pull the trigger, whenever 3 thought about the moment he would pull the trigger and finally put his plan into motion, he always felt a strange sensation welling up inside of him. Strangely enough, it was a desperate urge to fill her in. There were a number of times where 3 had tried, actually. Before he could even get the first word out, however, memories of Ace's sword speeding toward him would flash through his mind. In the end, he always remained silent. I can't take this anymore. I can't let my scars define me. I know what I have to do. There's no other way. 3 shook off the thoughts plaguing him and returned his focus to preparing for escape. The only person I can trust is myself. The rest of the day went by quickly before long, dusk began to settle on the town. The day saw 3's diligence pay off at last. His final preparations had gone as smoothly as he could have hoped for. The time had finally arrived. He would set his plan into motion that night. Once 9 fell asleep, he would leave the town via Mountain Road. Once in Calvert, he would be traveling by car, and he had already arranged for a rental to take him up north to a certain city. Once he arrived, he'd promptly set off for Liberal via one of the international airship routes that regularly departed from the city. He had yet to decide what to do after that point. He could stay a night or two in Liberal, or perhaps head over to Le Mans. In any case, he needed to get as far away from his current location as possible. He may have been in the lowest rung of the organization and had little idea of what went on in its upper echelons, but he determined to show them all what he was capable of, casting off the shackles they had bound him with. Just insert like a sound effect there, guys. Yeah. His rising determination was interrupted by a weird crow flying into the room. It made a few circles in the air before landing on the table. What the? Taking a closer look at the bird, 3 noticed a specific crest adorning one of its legs. Hey, Wolf Gaming, good to see you. You're halfway through Daybreak? I'm going through 3 and 9 real quick before we embark in this one. Taking a closer look at the bird, 3 noticed a specific crest adorning one of its legs. As he did, his face twisted into a grimace. It could only mean one thing. This was the method the Overseer used to communicate. Now? He wants to meet now? It hadn't even been an entire day since 3 had delivered his report. The briefing for the next mission, maybe? Even as he said the words, he was gripped by an indescribable sense of dread and anxiety. However much he wanted to simply ignore the summons, it was not a luxury he could afford. The only chance his plan had of succeeding was if he was able to put a good amount of distance between himself and his would-be pursuers before the Overseer realized what had happened. Were 3 to ignore direct orders, however, the organization would immediately recognize it as an act of rebellion, one that would inevitably lead to his death. Mentally preparing himself for another encounter, one he could not avoid, 3 set out for the meeting location. The rendezvous point was at the foot of a small hill deep within the mountains. The same site he had been just that morning, in fact. There remained no trace of the ominous, eerie stillness that pervaded the place before, however. Bathed by the light of the setting sun, the weathered boulders seemed wreathed in brilliant flames from a distance. 3 arrived to find 2 figures already waiting for him. The first was the Overseer, draped in the same tattered robe as usual. The thought occurred to 3 that it made the man look more the part of the Hermit Arcana than it did the Emperor. At the man's side stood a young girl carrying a large stuffed bear. 9. Her attire was more or less the same as what she wore on the Haldor mission, with a few alterations to make it more functional and mobile. Her presence there did not cause any alarm for 3. After all, they had been called to be briefed on their next mission. It was only natural she would be summoned as well. Something felt different, however. 3 couldn't put his finger on why, but anxiety began gripping his chest.
So you've arrived,
the Overseer said as 3 approached. Yes, what is my task? The initial exchange was the same as it always was. What happened after, however, was decidedly not.
Make your appeal.
My appeal? 3 said slowly, the anxiety of his chest rising.
I have received a report detailing your treachery from 9 of Swords.
I don't, 3 stammered. He was at an utter loss for words. He had calculated each and every outcome that could potentially happen, going over the steps in his head time and time again, and the absolute worst possible one was now playing out right before his eyes. A wave of despair washed over him. Could this really be happening? Had Nine betrayed him just like Ace? It wasn't possible, 3 thought. He hadn't told her a thing. He knew their relationship was strictly professional, and he could not, under any circumstances, trust her. That was just how partnerships in the organization worked. How could she have known? It didn't make any sense. There has to be some kind of mistake. 3 attempted to defend himself, knowing full well it was a futile endeavor. You can't talk yourself out of this, S. No. 3 of Swords. 9 finally spoke, but her usually sleepy demeanor was nowhere to be found. Instead, her voice was crisp, her eyes alert. She removed a scrap of paper from within her bear and showed it to 3. This is your ticket for the airship voyage to Liberl, the one you booked for noon tomorrow. 3 fell to the ground 3 felt the ground fall out from under him. Amidst his shock, a small part of him wanted to yell out that the ticket was fake, that he had the real ticket, but to do so would be tantamount to suicide. 9 continued speaking, as though directly responding to 3's unspoken question. The ticket you have in your possession is a counterfeit. I swapped it for the genuine one while you weren't paying attention. Fresh from completing the mission that utilized this very kind of forgery, 3 now found himself the victim of the exact same trick. By the way, the name you used to acquire this ticket was Rhines Foggart, a student of Genis Royal Academy, correct? 9 continued. That's the name you used for your false ID on one of our missions last year. That would mean you've been planning this for quite some time, wouldn't it? Despite the immediate threat to his life, 3 couldn't help but admire 9's genius. Strangely enough, 3 decided he wouldn't even try to come up with an excuse. 9 had clearly seen right through his plan. She'd seen right into his mind, really. There was just one part he didn't understand. Even if it was her duty to sell him out like this, even if she was a genius, he had been so cautious and prudent in every step of his plan, yet it had all been laid bare, seemingly without a trace of effort. How the hell had this happened? I take your expression means you're trying to puzzle out how your entire plan was exposed, 9 said, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips. It was clear to 3 that she was toying with him now, mocking him. You do realize I've been watching you the whole time we've been partners, right? You've been my only target right from day one. Her tone was merciless, her words dripping with thinly veiled venom. Yes, I've been watching you, 3, inspecting, observing. The only real challenging was remaining patient as I waited for you to slip up and finally show your true colors. It's always been that way since the moment I became your partner. 3 struggled to wrap his mind around what 9 was saying. The fact is, you did attempt to betray the organization, but even if you hadn't, I would have falsified whatever I needed in order to ensure your demise. She continued to speak, leaving nothing unsaid despite the overseer's presence, which, with every word, 3 felt more and more baffled. He could understand her observing him to the degree that the job required, but there was this malicious hatred from her coming from. She'd felt this way from the start? Why? The overseer, who had been silent for some time, let out a slow, derisive laugh.
I take it you have yet to figure it out. Who she is, I mean.
3 could not, for the life of him, figure out what this was supposed to mean. He looked over at 9, searching for some sort of clue. All he was met with, however, was a glare of pure hatred, one that made him shudder in fear. He had never seen her look that way before. Do you remember Ace of Swords, your former partner? She began, before her voice gained a measure of deadly weight to it. The one you murdered? He was my brother! 3's world began spinning. He started to feel violently ill. His senses dulled, his mind went blank. It became hard to breathe, as though he were being pulled to the bottom of the sea, the air crushed out of his lungs by its unrelenting pressure.
Now, after all this time, I can finally avenge his murder.
3 barely heard Nine's words as his head swam with thoughts.
Ace was Nine's brother? She had known everything from the start? She had been biding her time, hiding her true intentions from the moment they'd first met, always keeping a watchful eye for a suitable opportunity to arise, an opportunity to claim her vengeance.
3 stood there, dumbfounded, as though he had lost the ability to speak entirely. Let's see.
I see no need for you to sputter through an excuse,
The overseer said, reading the shock clearly written on 3's face.
We have all the facts we need. You will be purged from the organization. As per our rules, your partner, Nine of Swords, will now end your life.
Hearing the overseer's words, Nine stepped forward. If you wish for assistance in this task. Okay.
If you wish for assistance in this task,
He said, turning to her.
you will not be penalized. The reward will remain the same. The only condition is that you must be the one to deliver the final blow. Once you have eliminated him, your obligations will be cleared, though I admit the idea of losing such a talent pains me.
The reward, the right to one's freedom, gained by uncovering and then executing a partner who betrayed the organization. The yearning for its freedom had dominated 3's existence for years now, and 9 would be the one to gain it, in exchange for his life.
Allow me the honor of doing it alone, she responded. I will avenge my brother's death with my own hands.
She took another step forward, producing a number of poisoned needles from her bear. Without a moment's hesitation, she launched them at 3. He instinctively drew his sword and batted the needles out of the air. The combat tactics had been drilled into him dictated he close the distance between them, yet he didn't take so much as a single step. His parry was purely reflexive, programmed into his mind throughout the years of combat. He had no intention of truly fighting back. Perhaps it was partially because he didn't want to hurt her. More than anything, however, it was because he knew that there was no point in resisting. Even if he did manage to best 9, he would need to take on the Emperor afterwards, and he knew that that was a battle he had no chance of winning. 3 simply accepted his fate. It was to die here and then, and there was nothing he could do to change it. 9 pulled out roughly twice as many needles as before and launched them at her former partner. In response, he automatically drew his short sword and used both blades to swiftly deflect them. In 3's mind, the thought slowly began to sink in. This was his retribution for killing Ace. 9 leapt at him, closing the distance, and began attacking with an even greater intensity. Someone like me, 3 thought, someone who slaughters a friend to preserve his own life, doesn't deserve freedom. Someone like me doesn't deserve to live. 9 continued her assault, attacking with both her needles and thread. Were this any ordinary situation, there was no chance she would be a match for 3 in close quarters fight. However, his heart was not in the battle, causing a significant shift in the balance of power in this fight. Eventually, 9 managed to decisively gain the upper hand, successfully looping her thread around 3's neck. I'll die for her vengeance, he thought. Maybe that's the only outcome that makes sense. Maybe that's the end that I deserve. 9 deftly moved her fingers, and the steel collar tightened around 3's neck. This is the end, she said in a flat, frigid tone. 3 knew what would happen next. He closed his eyes, choosing to await his end in silence, but the cold embrace of death did not come. Oh man, it's getting good. Okay. Chapter 6, Knight of Swords. My mother died soon after I was born. From that point, it was just me, my older brother, and our dad. As far back as I can remember, my dad was a monster. He took the Mira Mom left us and used it entirely for himself, spending each day drinking it away. He made no effort to put it to good use, to do anything that might have helped our family, and when he was in a bad mood, what little safe haven we had was violently wrested away. My brother acted more like a parent to me than Dad ever did. Whether at home or somewhere else, he always protected me. I really hated that house, but I always felt like it was bearable when he was there by my side. Those days didn't last for long, however. I was still quite young when the household ran out of money and Dad decided to put us to work. There weren't many options for a child to make much mira though, and even between my brother and I, our income barely made a scratch in the mounting debt. One day, my brother vanished and Dad announced he'd let him spread his wings. In other words, he had abandoned him. It was just at that point I stopped thinking that monster. It was at that point that I stopped thinking of that monster as my family. Even in such an awful situation, I still held on to the idea that my brother would come back to me one day. That meant my only option was to stay there until he did. 3 long years later, I finally received a letter from him. He wrote that he was in a miserable place, but he was managing to stay alive. I was able to send him a reply via the same method, thrilled to have a connection with him once again. I eventually found out that he was being forced to work as a killer for a shadow society called the Organization. The things he said he had to do were awful, inhuman. Just from reading his words, I could feel the pain as though it was my own. He said that the organization was nightmarishly strict and that it was only thanks to his partner that he was able to send me letters in the first place. My brother wrote a lot about his partner, describing him as a true friend, almost like a younger brother. This was the only topic where I saw his writing soften. There, where he seemed happy. Naturally, I found myself wanting to meet this person, but that was impossible and I knew it. I couldn't even meet with my own sibling, let alone his partner in some secret assassin cabal. We continued exchanging letters like this for some time, but even that came to an end. The household ran out of mira again, and I knew what was coming. I could tell it would soon be my turn to leave. I wrote my brother, telling him as much. He wrote back telling me that he and his partner had decided to escape the organization. I could sense from his words just how resolved he was to do it. He followed his declaration with a promise to come for me, to get me out of this hellhole of a home. What followed, however, at the very end of his letter, was a grim note. If this escape somehow ends in failure, I'm going to prioritize my partner's life over my own. If it comes down to it, I'll sacrifice everything to make sure he at least gets out of here. You can trust him. If anything happens, you can rely on him for help. That was the last letter I ever received from him. In the end, he never came back for me, and our dad kicked me out. Hang on a second. Let me double check something. This is 9's origin story. Okay, I've been reading this whole time thinking of 3, but it's 9. Okay, so okay. If anything happens, you can rely on him for help. That was the last letter I ever received from him. In the end, he never came back for me, and our dad kicked me out just as I thought he would. He had become a slovenly mess. From the look of it, he had gotten himself addicted to some especially nasty substance, the kind that tend to quickly drain one's finances. I knew they were destroying him physically as well, but I had stopped caring about that long ago. I was done with that disgusting scumbag I had once called my dad. I used an intermediary to secure an opportunity to join the organization. It was right as I was entering training that I learned of my brother's death. I was told that he was killed by his own partner. It was then that my world began to fall apart. I threw myself headlong into my training, not thinking of anything else. I was distraught and trying to escape reality however I could. I ignored everyone around me, even myself. I let my soul slip into hibernation and fully assumed the role of one of the organization's tools. During the day, I would follow orders, not thinking of myself, but then night would come and I would have nothing to do to distract me. My mind would be tormented by thoughts of my brother's passing. The realization that I was now truly alone in the world shook me, as did the notion that my hands would soon be irreversibly stained with blood. Once the fear set in, there was no escaping it, and I gradually lost the ability to sleep properly. The body does have a limit, of course, and I'd eventually fall unconscious for about an hour a night. 2 if I was really lucky, but it wasn't sleep, not really. It was far too shallow for me to physically or mentally recover much, and what little I did get was plagued by nightmares. Even after I had woken up, those bizarre, horrid sensations remained. A year passed like this, no improvement whatsoever. Despite that, I was able to graduate from the factory in an exceptionally fast pace. That was when I finally had a chance to meet him, the boy who had fought alongside my brother as his partner. He had just finished his own re-education, a consequence of betraying the organization. As fate would have it, we were assigned as partners. He was the one who had stolen my brother from me, so I was resolved to despise him from the moment we met. I quietly kept a close eye on him, observing each and every one of his movements. Before long, though, something unexpected happened. Perhaps all of my pent-up fear and exhaustion had finally boiled over. Perhaps it was my strict instincts telling me the truth I had been ignoring. Whatever the reason, one day we were on a mission and I found myself able to sleep when I was next to him. I mean, actually sleep, deeply and soundly, for the first time in an entire year. There was something about his presence that gave me a sense of security. It wasn't unlike how I remembered feeling being next to my brother, strangely enough. When I woke up from this much-needed rest, so many things came rushing back. Suddenly, without warning, I found myself bawling, and as those tears came pouring out, the chains that had been sealed away, my heart slowly began to loosen. I started feeling human again. I could feel my emotions in the first time in what felt like an eternity. As soon as he saw me crying, the boy quickly came over to console me, but that just made me sob even harder. I quickly discovered my new partner really was the person my brother wrote so fondly about. Blunt and awkward, but overall deeply kind person and a very thoughtful partner. Despite being shackled to the organization and forced to kill for years, he had yet to fully surrender his humanity. He did seem to be bearing a great sorrow, one far more intense than anything my brother had described. I could tell he wasn't the kind of person capable of betraying and murdering a friend to ensure his own survival. Given my brother's letter, it wasn't hard to work out what really happened. After making their escape, the two were backed into a corner and their prospects were grim. Rather than both of them being killed, it was better that at least one of them survived. The only way for that to happen was for one to kill the other, to gain forgiveness in the eyes of the organization. My brother knew his partner would reject the idea outright, and even if he did accept it, he would insist on playing the part of the sacrifice. I was absolutely sure of that much. That's why my brother ended up feigning betrayal in order to get his partner to fight back and ultimately kill him. It was a plan that would spare his partner's life, but would also deeply scar him in the only way an unexpected betrayal could. From that point on, being near him was the only way I was able to feel secure enough to sleep. And sleep I did, every chance I got. Midday during our missions, if there was even the slightest opportunity, I was out like a light.
After all, I needed to catch up on the years of rest I had been robbed of. It was truly surprising. It was a truly surprising turn of events for me, to say the least. I soon learned that the boy was tormented by constant nightmares. I imagined the incident was with my brother played a big role. There were so many moments where I saw how he was suffering and wanted to tell him the truth, but I would always stop myself at the last second, telling myself the time wasn't right. Our mission occasionally called for performances of sorts to deceive onlookers. He was always pretty terrible at it. It was hard to say why exactly that was, though. His movements were fine enough, as were his facial expressions. The factory emphasized those things in his teachings. So he had received ample instruction there. It was just that he always seemed to overdo things or drastically underdo them. I wondered if maybe it might have been something to do with the unshakable seriousness he always seemed to have about him. It could be a real problem sometimes, even to the point where he would become more of a liability than an asset. Any onlooker with half a brain would be able to tell something was less than genuine about his performance. I came to the conclusion that he was just naturally bad at deceiving others. That's why I had to keep my plans from him, to prevent his terrible poker face from giving us away. He'd been earnestly working to escape for a long time. I, of course, understood the immense difficulty of this task and why he had to keep it to himself. Still, it made me a bit sad that he never spoke to me about it. He was in a precarious position, given the organization still had its doubts about him. I wasn't able to do anything to put him at risk, of course, but his shaky acting alone could very well have led to the organization seeing through his carefully laid scheme. If that happened, it would be the end of him. No question about it.
You're right there, Hollow. 3 in shambles, man.
The situation hadn't quite reached that point yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it did. After the Haldor barn mission wrapped up, I wanted to make my report. The man I reported to had an aura unlike anything I'd ever felt. He was the evil monster who managed the two of us, the organization's overseer, the Emperor. He was the one forcing us to kill. His face was always obscured by a robe, but it failed to mask the malice that overflowed from him. That day, he had a quiet, deadly exuberance about him, like a hawk that had locked into its prey. There was no mistaking it. I knew he had caught onto my partner. He knew he intended to betray the organization again. I knew he would gleefully purge him when the time came, and that time was getting closer with each passing day. If that's how things were going to be, I told myself, I would have to get ahead of them and put my own plan into motion. The Emperor's intentions were obvious. Aware of the cruel history my partner and I shared, he made us partners in a bid to slowly push me toward revenge. He knew I'd eventually break and sell my partner out, forcing him through another bitter betrayal. The Emperor was looking forward to watching it all unfold. We were both tools of the organization and the personal playthings of the Emperor's. So I decided to give him exactly what he wanted to see. Once I had finished my mission report, I told the Emperor of my partner's intent to betray the organization. I then shared my plan to lure him into a specific place where I would eliminate him. I gave a detailed explanation, making it as enticing as possible for the Emperor. It was easily enough to gain his consent. Even with his face hidden under his cowl, he could barely contain the excitement in his voice coming from in his voice over the coming slaughter. The laugh that escaped his throat was a sound so vile, it still haunts me to this day.
Oh, written in past tense. I suppose she survives.
Later that evening, my partner arrived at the designated location, the base of a hill deep in the mountains. At first, he was horribly shaken by the realization he'd been betrayed. When he learned who my brother was, though, His face changed. I watched his surprise turn to despair, which in turn shifted to absolute acceptance of his fate. To call what I saw heart-wrenching didn't do it justice. I focused my efforts on giving him the most vicious glare possible, one equal parts mocking and murderous. I came up with the foulest, most malicious thing I could bear to say, trying to cut him to his very core. After all, the Emperor was standing right next to me, and if I was to be convincing, I couldn't afford even the slightest hesitation. I stepped forward. I was going to eliminate him. I shifted closer to my partner in order to facilitate my threat attacks, or so I made it appear. My true objective was to put some distance between myself and the Emperor. Once I had my thread around his neck, the battle was as good as over. From there, I knew I could end his life with a flick of a finger. This is the end. I meant those words from the bottom of my heart. A transparent cord ran through the center of the web of thread under my control. Manipulating this cord allowed me to set off a chain reaction that twisted it into a complex spiral shape that I would use to trap distant foes during my mission. Fully focused on watching his toys in the throes of bloodthirsty vengeance, it was the Emperor who had relaxed his guard the most. Right at the climax of our battle, I seized the opportunity, and with perfect timing I was able to ensnare the unwitting Emperor, leaving him shackled and immobile. The key was the transparent cord. It may not have had the same cutting power as steel thread, but it was more than twice as strong. Even so, I couldn't count on it to hold the Emperor for long. Without a moment's delay, I summoned my strength to pull on the cord. A low rumble sounded, and the section of the rocky hill collapsed, dropping a torrent of rubble below. I had taken my time to find the perfect location, one with brittle bedrock that I could have break away on cue. The stones roared and tumbled in huge waves, hurtling down toward the Emperor. In the middle of it all was a giant boulder more than 10 arges across. Time seemed to slow as it fell directly down at the Emperor's head, and the thunder of the rock slide drowning out all of the sound. Finally, it all came crashing down. The aftermath looked as though a catastrophic earthquake had just taken place. The Emperor had taken a direct hit from a massive boulder. There was no way he could have survived that. Even if he somehow had, he is now buried alive. My partner looked on in confusion, still processing what just happened. "S!" I cried out, finally able to use the name I preferred to call him by. I ran over to him and buried my head in his chest. This was where I felt most safe by his side. I nuzzled up against him, holding him tight, never wanting to let go. I had never hugged him before then. I had always been too afraid to do so. "I'm so sorry I said those horrible things," I sobbed. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth." There was so much more to explain, but those were the things I needed to say the most. Even though he was still reeling from everything that just happened, he was still kind enough to hold me close and stay calm, and try to calm me down. "9, what in the world?" Before he could finish his sentence, something I never predicted happened. The small mountain of fallen rocks and boulders shifted slightly. Pebbles began to rise up in the air. It was slow, but unmistakable. "What's happening?" Dumbfounded, all we could do was look on in confusion. "Is it some kind of space element art? There's no way," I mused aloud. No, that didn't seem right. Perhaps it was some kind of device that functioned the same way as an airship's anti-gravity components? I didn't understand what it was happening. I just sat there, staring blankly, my mind racing for an explanation. Before I could reach one, however, my partner spoke, his voice steeped in panic. "That's the Emperor's power!" But that would mean the Emperor was still alive. And more rocks began floating upward, taking their place among the ever-increasing collection, gently balanced in the air. "9, we need to move!" I continued to sit there, absolutely at a loss of what to think. 3 grabbed my hand, and we set off in a sprint.
We were able to cover a good amount of distance before we heard what sounded like a massive explosion behind us. We turned to see boulders and rocks of all sizes being flung upward into the sky like a volcano erupting before our eyes. Whoa. Oh man. What a whirlwind of emotion. What a crazy story. Oh shit. 3 and 9. Oh yeah, sorry. Chapter 7. Tears and Promises. 3 and 9 ducked into a mountain cave on their outskirts of Luzent. They had fled the Emperor as fast as their legs would carry them, and were now completely out of breath. As they sat there together, 9 told 3 everything she had kept from him up until then. She told him about Ace, about herself, the details of her plan, and finally, what Ace's true intentions were on the night 3 years ago. At the start, 3 occasionally chimed in or asked questions, but as the conversation went on, he fell silent. But by the end, his head was hung so low that 9 couldn't see his expression. He had been utterly convinced that his friend, his one true friend, had betrayed him, when in reality, Ace had sacrificed his life to ensure 3 would survive. And as thanks for that incredibly selfless act, 3 had not only killed him, but had spent the past 3 years despising his memory. Then came his sister, risking her life to save her brother's killer. 3 felt his chest tighten up. A wild mix of emotions ran through his head, threatening to overpower him. He was grateful for being fortunate enough to have 2 people in his life, Ace and 9, who he could fully trust. At the same time, he felt a bottomless well of anger burst up, anger at himself, the pathetic excuse of a human being that he was. Battered by his storm of emotions, his breathing became increasingly ragged. "S, are you crying?" 9 looked up in concern, having finished her story. She didn't need a response, however. 3's pained silence spoke volumes. "I'm fine," he said, returning to his usual blunt tone. "Is there anything that I can do to make you feel better?" 9 asked. "I said I'm fine." Despite his words, 3's head still hung low. "You're an awful actor, but you're even worse liar when you're not performing. You know that?" 3 sunk down to his knees. 9 moved over to him, taking his head in her hands. She began gently ruffling his hair like a mother comforting a child. "Everything is okay now," she murmured. "It's all okay." "But I... 3 stammered, his voice growing weak and hoarse. The last bits of 3's facade broke down, overwhelmed by 9's kindness, and he relented at last. 9 was younger than 3, and definitely looked the part, but in that moment, she showed an almost motherly level of understanding and compassion. For some reason, for someone like 3, who grew up without that warmth, it was his first time being comforted by someone, his first time feeling the warmth of family. "I know how strong you've had to be, S. I know how hard it's been for so long. But it's okay now, I promise." No longer able to hold his emotions back, he finally broke down. A lifetime's worth of tears came flooding out of his eyes all at once. I'm such a wretched excuse of a... He sobbed, no longer able to control his voice in the slightest. Hot tears poured down his cheeks, staining the cool floor of the cave. "That's not true. You know that's not true," 9 said softly, continuing to run her fingers through his hair. "Why am I still alive? Why isn't Ace here instead?" He weakly slammed his fist against the ground in frustration. "Not another word of that. I won't hear it. You're the one who's been here for me the past 3 years. You, S. But it's because of me that Ace... Listen,
that means you need to fight twice as hard. You're living for him too now. I... Three's words failed him as he was overtaken by sobbing. His years of pain and suffering poured out of him. After some time, Three was able to calm himself down somewhat and regain his composure. I'm here for you now, so you don't have to cry, 9 told him. But if you ever want to, then that's okay too. So which is it then? So which is it then? 3 retorted, his detached demeanor creeping back. He suddenly became aware of the fact that he was in her arms and hurriedly pulled away, immediately shifting the conversation back toward exchanging information in an attempt to mask his sudden embarrassment. They finished catching up and turned their attention to the current predicament. So, the Overseer had figured me out. He knew I was going to try and make a run for it, and that's why you moved to strike first, in order to outmaneuver him, 3 thought out loud. That's right. I've been watching the whole time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take him down. I'd wished you'd told me beforehand. And let you spoil the element of surprise with your awful acting skills? 9 gave a wry grin. Yeah, I don't think so. 3's face scrunched up a bit. Both 9 and the Emperor had caught on to his plan, so there was little room to defend himself in that regard. I chose the moment he'd be the most distracted, 9 continued, switching to a serious expression. My timing was perfect, and my preparations were more than enough. But despite all of that, despite everything, despite being buried under a pile of massive boulders, the Emperor was still very much alive. No matter how much she thought, 9 simply couldn't figure out how it was possible. It's likely his power at work, 3 said. He had the same feeling earlier, right as they took off running. What exactly is his power? 9 asked. I'm fairly certain he can control gravity somehow, 3 said. He did something similar when Ace and I fought him 3 years ago. 3 wrenched open a bitter, painful memory and began relaying what he remembered to 9. He and Ace had been able to fend off the first pairs of assailants sent after them by the organization, but then they had come face to face with the Emperor. Even with the element of surprise on their side, even when they coordinated their attacks perfectly, facing him proved exceptionally difficult. They found their bodies heavy and clumsy, and their movements lacked precision and skill. The Emperor, on the other hand, was nimble as could be, almost inhumanly so, and the two were quickly overpowered. So, what do you think? 3 looked at 9, awaiting her input. There was no sign of him starting any cast or charge up, so I doubt he's using arts, she said, her brow furrowed in thought. As for a portable gravity manipulation device small enough for a single person to carry and conceal, well, given modern technology, it's seriously hard to imagine. He might have an artifact or something like it. An avalanche couldn't kill him if he had enough precise control to be able to move individual stones and boulders. 9 scratched her head in frustration. This sucks. We really don't have a lot to go on here. She paused, thinking a moment more, and then continued. In any case, unless something major happens, he's too powerful for us. Any attempt at a direct attack is going to result in our deaths. They fell silent for a time. 3 spoke up, a grave expression on his face. If the time comes when we have to choose, we're going to prioritize your life, 9. You need to be the one to kill. Stop it! 9 silenced 3 with an outburst of pure emotion, far more raw than her usual self. But then at least you'd be able to. If you die, I'm going right after you, she shouted. I'll do it myself if I have to. The calm motherly figure from before was nowhere to be seen. 9 was in a frenzy now, almost like a child throwing a tantrum. Regardless of her tone, however, her words were heartfelt and earnest. I can't go back to not being able to sleep. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I can't go back to being alone. The weight of her feelings was clear to 3. Seeing this, he let out a short sigh. Then you have my word. No matter what happens, I'll protect you. That's not what I'm asking for. Okay, you're right, 3 said, taking a deep breath. Then I promise we'll survive this. We'll get through it together. 9 looked at 3 with imploring, almost pleading eyes. You swear? I swear, he said. Now, if we're going to have any chance at all, we need to do everything perfectly. The rock slide was massive enough, and that despite the fact that he survived it, it was hard to imagine the Emperor was completely unscathed. If they tried to flee now, the organization would quickly find him again, and they would have to contend with the Emperor at his full strength. The pair knew that if they were going to make a move, now was the time. Let's do it then. We'll take him out.
Oh man. Chapter 8. Gravity and Artifacts. 3 and 9 returned to the hill, or more accurately, where the hill used to be. It was now completely unrecognizable. A sizable chunk of it was gone, having been strewn about the area in the form of countless bits of rubble. The Emperor stood right where they had left him, seemingly unfazed. As 3 and 9 had surmised, he had sustained at least some manner of injury. Nothing major, but his ever-present robe under which he had hidden his face had been reduced to little more than a shredded cape. Underneath, he wore a gold helmet bearing a crown design. In his hand, he carried a golden scepter with a spherical tip, and his body was covered in golden armor. The word ostentatious was insufficient to describe his heavily gilded countenance. Everything about him suggested both needless grandeur and wicked condescension.
I knew you'd return. You two aren't complete fools after all.
I don't know, is that the right voice for him? Yeah, sure. Hey, Lau, good to see you, man. It's Perfect Cell. I think I can actually do a pretty okay Perfect Cell voice. But that's not it. It's difficult. You have to, you have to really use your, gotta use your abdomen here. Yeah, man, I can't do it on command. I'm still learning to use my, what do they call that? The thing right here that actually lets you project your voice. I never use that, but diaphragm, that's the word. But that's what you gotta do to be a real perfect cell. I'm still, no, can't do it. Yep. It's like the most smug rich guy. Exactly. At least the Team 4-star version of it. I can get close to it sometimes when I'm being really loud. I don't want to blow out the mic. Anyways, so for now we'll just go with my slightly slightly artificially enhanced voice.
I knew you would return. You two aren't complete fools after all.
The Emperor called out to them. 3 and 9 remained silent as they slowly approached.
So, have you decided which of you two will gain the organization's forgiveness?
3 and 9 turned to each other and nodded. 3 removed his hand from his sword, leaving it sheathed. 3 knelt down and closed his eyes, showing an acceptance of what was to come. In response, 9 pulled out some of her poison needles and silently launched them at 3's neck. Or at least that's how she made it appear. At the last second before the needles parted from her fingers, she deftly altered the trajectory, sending them speeding toward the Emperor instead. The envenomed projectiles whizzed perfectly through the air as ever. However, as they neared their intended target, they suddenly curved downward, sharply plummeting harmlessly to the ground.
Well, very well. I hear your answer loud and clear,
The Emperor proclaimed, looking at the pair.
You both wish to die today.
Not a chance, Nine called out, throwing another volley of needles directly at the Emperor. Their trajectory suddenly shifted again, this time upward. From his kneeling position, Three quickly shifted his stance and pushed forward off the ground with all the power he could muster in his legs and launched himself at the Emperor, breaking into a full-on charge. We've had enough! You're the one meeting their death today! Three began slashing away at his target with incredible speed. His lightning-quick strikes were slow and sluggish as soon as they neared the Emperor. However, with his assailant's speed so drastically curbed, the man was able to use his golden scepter to effortlessly bat aside the boy's assault. In the same instant, Nine's second set of needle charges changed direction in mid-air and began falling straight for the Emperor. She had managed to calculate the range of his gravitational field with just a single throw. Once she understood the effects on projectiles, she was able to revise her trajectory. Moreover, she had factored in the increased acceleration from the higher gravity, meaning her needles would hit harder than normal. Despite all of that, her attack was neutralized by a flick of the Emperor's gilded arm, as it was not enough to penetrate his armor. It was, however, more than sufficient to arouse his ire.
You dare to defy me? Me?
Livid, he swung his scepter downward. Three immediately reacted, just barely managing to block the attack with his sword. Even so, the impact alone threw him back several arges. Three could feel his brain rattle in his skull from the force of the blow. There was no way the Emperor's physical strength and weight of the scepter alone could do that. It occurred to Three that there must have been another way. He was able to manipulate gravity.
You will be purged,
The Emperor said in a low growl, the same words Three heard him say a few hours ago and 3 years ago. When the Emperor spoke like this, it was nothing less than the arbitration of a death sentence. At the sound of those words, past memories bubbled up in Three's mind, and an old terror began to grip him. His legs grew wobbly, and he started to stagger. One glance back at Nine was all it took for him to restore his resolve. He forced himself back onto his feet, reflexively snapping it into a fighting stance, and Nine continued to provide covering fire with her needles as he resumed his assault. Their approach proved no more fruitful than before. Even so, as Three continued to fight under such grueling conditions, he slowly became more capable. His understanding of his foe's gravitational trickery improved, and his strikes grew more swift and precise as a result. The way his muscles intuitively reacted, the angle and speed at which he swung his sword, he was slowly chipping away at the Emperor's overwhelming advantage. Though Three may not have enjoyed the same powers of insight that his partner possessed, his skills in close quarters combat were elite by even the most exacting of standards. For her part, Nine's cover was solid and unwavering. Realizing her needles had no hope of piercing the armor's golden plating, she had instead begun aiming for gaps between its plates. It was an incredibly difficult task, but as she grew more accustomed to the disrupting effects of the gravitational field, she was gradually getting closer. She began weaving an offensive arts in alongside with her volleys and needles in order to keep the Emperor on his toes. Her attacks appeared simple enough for her foe to deal with, but they still managed to pull his attention away from Three, even if only for a moment. The fight raged on, and after a bit of time, 3 and 9 appeared to have finally begun gaining the upper hand, yet the Emperor did not seem fazed in the slightest. His expression was unreadable beneath the shadows of his helmet, but it was clear from his body language he still believed himself truly in control of the situation. 3 managed to land the occasional strike, but even his swords seemed to do little against the Emperor's impossibly resilient armor. In an attempt to land a heavier blow, 3 launched himself into the air, intending to let the gravity carry his swords downward as 9's needles had. However, he found himself soaring up far higher than he had intended, impossibly so, as though he had suddenly sprouted wings. His mark completely missed. He lost his sense of balance and began tumbling through the air. He quickly realized it could only have been due to more of his foe's trickery. Reduced gravity? Expertly seizing the opening, the Emperor raised his scepter overhead, then swiftly swung it downward, as if mimicking this motion. 3 suddenly dropped out of the air, thrown to the ground below like a rag doll. Gah! The air knocked out of his lungs. 3 struggled to catch his breath, spitting up mouthfuls of blood in between gasps. Get out of the way! He's not done! Saved by 9's frantic warning, 3 just barely managed to roll out of the way. A split second later, the scepter slammed down onto the ground where he had just been. As the gravity-enhanced scepter connected with the rocky ground below, it let out a powerful blast, leaving a crater in its wake. S! The resulting shockwave launched 3 to the side, knocking him relative safety. Had he taken a direct hit, he would have been completely pulverized. Though dazed, he was still aware enough to signal to 9 that he was okay. He forced himself to his feet. The battle had completely changed. The Emperor had begun manipulating levels on a constant cycle. The Emperor had begun manipulating gravity levels on a constant cycle, and 3 was forced into a defensive position. When he managed to get a handle on his foe's barrage of attacks, he found the gravity level altered yet again, forcing himself back to 0. It was impossible for him to fight in such an ever-changing conditions. The situation was taxing for 9 as well. She found herself forced to constantly recalculate the field's range and gravity value, severely reducing the number of effective attacks she was able to launch. Despite their bleak outlook, the two of them continued to hold out. Even when pressed, 3 served as an excellent vanguard, consistently denying the Emperor opportunities for decisive strikes. 9, meanwhile, continued to back him up flawlessly, acting with surgical precision that ensured no opening went to waste. S! She called out to him as he leapt back, putting some distance between himself and the Emperor. I think I've figured something out. Let's hear it. 3 waited for her to continue, keeping his guard up, and watched closely for any sign of attack from the Emperor. Have you noticed anything from when you and Ace fought from before? Was he carrying anything in his left hand back then? 3 glanced at his foe's left hand, seeing it empty. He thought about it 3 years ago. Now that you mention it, I'm pretty sure he had an orb with him. Purple, with a golden sculpture of a crow on it. The battle back then was completely one-sided. Just as I suspected, 9 nodded. 3 had also sensed something different, but had simply chalked it up as the Emperor toying with them, as he didn't consider them to be a true threat to him. Factoring in what 9 had now just pointed out, however, cast things in a much different light.
Oh, so you've realized.
The Emperor paused his onslaught, as though in recognition of 9's keen observation.
You see the
implements he has on him now? I suspect at one point he had 4 different artifacts that let him control gravity. 4, huh? 3 said, taking note of the Emperor's equipment. Right, a helmet with a crown motif that can increase or reduce the overall effect of gravity, armor that absorbs the force imparted by attacks at the moment they are received, A scepter that sends out devastating gravitational waves when it makes contact with its target, and an orb with a crow perched on it that allows its wielder to alter gravity on a target-by-target basis. 9 paused her explanation for a moment as she looked defiantly at the Emperor. The reason he'd worn that tattered cloak was now clear. If someone were to wield so many artifacts at once as he did, it would be necessary to conceal them. Failure to do so would surely attract unwanted attention from the church. Now that you mention it, this time around he hasn't been moving faster while slowing us down at the same time, 3 said. We fought him before, we couldn't even touch him. It was true that in their fight against him, 3 and Ace had been struggling under different levels of gravity than the Emperor. There was no doubt that he was toying with them, but in the present, at the very least, both sides were battling under the same levels of gravity, constantly shifting though they were. As such, the pair's odds of winning were much better this time around. I think he's either lost the orb at some point, or it was destroyed, or at least damaged in the rock slide, 9 explained. The pair realized that if this were true, now was their best chance to take the Emperor down once and for all. A talented tool indeed.
A talented tool indeed.
The Emperor's voice was low and tinged with a hint of perverse delight.
The artifacts I wear are collectively known as the Monarch's Regalia. I'm impressed you were able to analyze their capabilities in such a limited amount of time. You, 9 of Swords, are truly outstanding.
I don't want your praise, freak! Ignoring 9's retort, the Emperor continued on, his exhilaration giving way to violent savagery.
But even in the greatest tool is worthless if it will not submit to its rightful place in my hands.
His body began levitating, broken chunks of earth underfoot rising upward with him. With all the force he could muster, he swung his scepter into a nearby boulder.
And worthless tools must be disposed of!
In that instant, the boulder shattered into shards of all shapes and sizes that were sent rocketing toward 9. Watch out! Watch out! 3 cried. The shards flew like a salvo of bullets from 1,000 different guns, all of them pointing directly at one target. It was a grim sight, not unlike a single soldier standing before the assault of an entire army. Panicked, 3 rushed into the line of fire. He brandished his sword and did everything he could to prevent the shards from reaching 9. He deflected and broke what he could, using his body as a shield for the rest, but there was a considerable distance between him and 9, one he could not cover easily. By the time he had leapt in the way, a great many shards were already too far ahead. 3 was too late. 9 had no realistic chance of avoiding the entirety of the attack, and instead devoted her efforts to simply avoiding the worst of the pieces of stone flying at her. There were far too many, however, and one managed to slip through her defenses. She suffered a direct hit to the abdomen, and a red mist sprayed from her mouth as she crumpled to the earth.
Oh.
All right. Oh, man. Chapter 9. Anger and Analysis. 9! 3 ran over to her, his voice hoarse with agony. Every time I read hoarse, I can't help but think, nay! Sorry. 9! 3 ran over to her, his voice hoarse with agony and grief. Her forehead, hands, legs, entire body was stained with blood, dripping from 1,000 scratches and cuts. It was a fate far too cruel for such a young girl. No matter how many times 3 called out to her, she didn't respond. He had sworn to protect her. He had promised himself, promised her. But now, 3 felt himself overcome by shame and regret. I'm too weak,
he thought to himself. Too weak to help anyone, too weak to save anyone. As if to seize upon his distress, the Emperor spoke once more.
So, one of you made it. Now, be wise and stop it here. Deliver the final blow and be spared, just as you did before.
At those words, Three felt a creaking in his mind. It was harsh, like the sound of metal scraping against metal.
Surely a girl like her would derive a warped satisfaction from being killed by the same one who took her brother.
The Emperor's mouth twisted into a perverse smile, the depravity in his eyes clear as though the shadow was clear even though the shadow cast by his helmet. It was then that something snapped inside of Three. Die! He exploded as if the boundless rage of coursing through his veins had at last found an outlet. His legs and arms snapped into operation. A primal rumble burst from his throat. His bones creaked. His blood boiled. Pure fury ignited his entire body, inciting it to action, and before he knew it, he had launched himself at the Emperor. He unleashed a whirlwind of attacks, his strikes faster and more powerful than ever before. The Emperor met the charge head-on, altering gravity as he went, but Three adapted to each shift almost as fast as they came. His body was running on pure instinct, honing his senses into a razor-sharp edge, giving him almost preternatural ability. The Emperor, on the other hand, found himself working harder and harder to handle Three's hail of blows. He managed to block oncoming strikes, but his attacker showed no signs of slowing down.
Like a wild dog!
The Emperor sneered.
A tool with a will of its own is a useless thing, to be sure, but seeing you foaming at the mouth is like pathetic beyond measure. You truly are fated to die as you lived, a mere thing.
Even in the face of Three's enraged onslaught, the Emperor had hardly taken any damage at all. He still held all of the cards. Three was little more than an annoyance, like a flea biting a wolf. Three's thoughts bubbled back to the surface. He found himself remembering something Nine had said. It was his natural sense of composure that allowed him to recall such a timely memory, a composure he did not possess 3 years ago. He continued to let his anger drive his body, but maintained a calm mind, not allowing his thoughts to slip away in his rage. He could have stopped himself at any time, but he found his rage beneficial and wielded it ably, as though it was simply another weapon available to him. Three himself was unaware of this, but such an ability to not only control one's emotions, but to turn them into power was rare indeed. It was a skill that did not come easily to even the greatest of warriors, yet Three had managed to master such a complicated concept at this young age. Armor that absorbs the force imparted by attacks the moment they are received. That was how Nine described the Emperor's armor. Sure enough, just as she described, no matter how many strikes Three launched, nothing seemed to get through. It was then that realization dawned on him. If the armor was immune to external force, then what he needed to do was induce an internal force. Anyone else may have given up at this point, but Three could scarcely imagine a more suitable target for his unique skills. He combined his blades into one, squaring off against the Emperor yet again. The defining characteristics of Three's weapons were their ability to internally induce an arts-based explosion in the target. To do so, he needed to strike the same point with each blade separately, and then a third time in the fused form. By this point, he had already landed a number of hits on the Emperor's armor, and, luckily for Three, a decent amount of those points had overlapped.
All that remained was the final step in the process, making contact with those intersecting points using his fused sword. 3 attacked the Emperor with the same rage and power as before. This time, though, he failed to land a single hit. He was just a hair's breadth off every single time. The first steps in this weapon's process were relatively simple. He simply needed to land a strike with each weapon, creating 2 perpendicular lines that would paint the target for the orbment. The next part, however, was far more difficult. He needed to use the fused blade to hit the precise point where the 2 lines intersected. This was a much smaller target area, making the task that much more demanding. Still, 3 was confident in his aim and knew he had the dexterity to pull it off, in spite of his skill and confidence. However, he continually found himself failing to land the decisive hit. The Emperor cackled in delight as he watched 3 struggle. To him, 3's plight was nothing short of pure comedy.
I know my tools inside and out,
He said with a dark grin spreading across his face.
Your methods of attack and how your weapons work. I understand these things even better than you.
As if proving the Emperor's point, 3's next attack fell short as well. The Emperor launched a counterattack with his staff, swung at the perfect angle. 3 had figured out his foe's tricks right before each of his attacks would land. The Emperor would make a subtle change to gravity. His timing was exquisite, and the trick was executing in such a way that 3 had no time to correct the angle of his sword. Further, the gravity was emitted by the Emperor's scepter did nothing at all when it failed to connect, but if it did, the resulting damage would be enormous. Thus far, 3 had been able to evade or turn away each incoming swing, but he knew it was only because the Emperor was allowing it. He had yet to land a single effective attack, and the wear on both his weapon and his own body was steadily mounting. The outcome of the battle seemed clear, and by all appearances, there was nothing that could change its course. Thanks to his impeccable defense, the Emperor was nearly unscathed, whereas 3 was barely holding on, looking more and more like he could collapse at any moment. In between clashes, a momentary calm settled over the battlefield. As 3 was weighing his options, a voice broke the silence. It was a lazy drawl, one that 3 had heard many times over the past year. Analysis complete. 9 struggled to her feet, looking as though she could fall back down at any moment.
How?
The Emperor's genuine look of shock escaped his mouth in a low hiss. 9, you're okay, 3 exclaimed. At once, he understood what happened. 9 hadn't fallen unconscious. She had simply feigned doing so in order to analyze the Emperor in secret. She had given 3 no indication of her plan whatsoever. After all, had she done so, the Emperor may very well have caught on to her plan. Just fine, she responded. I used my thread to cushion the blow of the boulders by shredding them into smaller pieces. In the end, the rocks barely scratched me. Judging by the amount of blood that covered her, it would have been clear to anyone that this was far from the truth, but the fact remained that she was both alive and conscious. 3 disengaged from the Emperor and moved closer to 9, making sure to keep his eyes trained on his foe as he did so. There's a moment when he's unable to respond to anything, she explained. That's his power's fatal weakness. What do you mean? His gravitational manipulation doesn't require casting like an art would, but after he uses it, there's a period of time of about a second before he's able to use it again. That's why he wasn't able to immediately prevent the falling rocks from burying him earlier. But the way he's changing gravity is so precise, 3 said, thinking back to the battle. How could he have managed that? He was just reading your movement, S. He knows how you fight like the back of his hand. Wait, what? 3 exclaimed in surprise in his voice clear. It's true, 9.
It's true, Nine responded. The way he manipulates gravity is determined before you even start your swings. He knows you well enough to straight up predict everything you'll do. Is that even possible? Asked 3, his mind racing. Sure is, Nine continued, and he's not even using an artifact for it either. His mind just works that quickly. He's a total monster, though, through and through. The Emperor let out a low chuckle.
A sound analysis, but it will avail you nothing. I know your techniques in and out. And the same speed, the same power, the same angles, each and every time. There is no possible way you can undo years of these habits, so painstakingly carved into you.
S. Nine looked up at him knowingly. Right, he acknowledged. Let's end this. The duo nodded in agreement and turned to face the Emperor once more. 3 charged at him, renewing his previous assault. He raised his sword overhead, attacking at a high angle. The Emperor dodged it effortlessly and sent it forth in a counterattack. Their deadly dance continued as before, but as things were, both sides knew where it would ultimately lead. The Emperor sensed an incoming attack and prepared to manipulate gravity, just as he had predicted. 3 attacked a half step faster, aiming for one of the spots on his armor that had previously been marked. As the sword raced towards its target, gravity shifted and the sword's trajectory was altered. Despite this, it somehow continued on its original path, regardless as if its altered gravity had been predicted and compensated for.
Impossible!
The Emperor muttered under his breath. He hastily jerked his body out of the blade's trajectory with hardly a second to spare. 3's movements had changed somehow. As the Emperor mulled the changing situation, 3's next attack came speeding in. The Emperor again predicted the speed and trajectory and manipulated gravity accordingly. However, boom! A muffled explosion rang out. The Emperor felt his armor crack and a pain course through him in his left arm. Boom!
What?
Another flash.
Boom!
His right leg was now damaged as well. The Emperor was at an utter loss. Had 3 managed to correctly predict his spatial manipulation? How was he able to suddenly alter his strikes to compensate for gravity? Had the analyzer been analyzed himself? Cursing 3's name, the Emperor thoughts grew frantic. As he desperately looked around for a clue, he realized what was actually happening. He glimpsed a number of barely visible cords extending from 3's body. Naturally, 9 stood at the other end, controlling them. She wasn't pulling him to and fro like a marionette, but was instead nudging his attacks slightly, guiding his direction, timing, and angle to create the perfect strike. The Emperor may have been predicting 3's attacks and making adjustments, but 9 was doing the same thing to him in turn. It was her guidance that allowed 3 to score direct hits after direct hit. Her superior intellect was, of course, a major reason why this was possible, but her relationship with 3 was their true secret. The two knew each other better than anyone in the world, which allowed her to predict his reactions and movements with incredible accuracy. She used her natural understanding of her partner to help him adapt his combat style and fit the situation at hand. In that sense, the secret behind the upper hand they had suddenly gained was as simple as could be.
You little witch!
The Emperor let out an enraged growl, laced with bitter hatred. Neither 3 nor 9 had ever seen him like this before. He tried to launch the same rocky onslaught at 9 that he had before, but found himself bereft of munitions. He could not be sure when it happened, but at some point the duo had led him to a different part of the area, one where he could no longer weaponize the terrain. With furious bloodlust, he lowered the gravity near him and rushed at 9. Finally, she smirked,
I've been waiting. A giant boulder appeared in the air above the Emperor, likely due to an art 9 cast. The Emperor was unimpressed. However, at being subjected to the same attack twice, this time around, it even lacked the element of surprise. He easily shattered the oncoming boulder with his staff once it entered the area of reduced gravity. But it was this flippant delay of arrogance that sealed his fate. As the pieces of the boulder rained down around him, he found himself face to face with a plush toy rabbit, one that had been hidden within the boulder.
No!
He exclaimed, knowing full well it was no mere toy. His realization came too late, however. With a massive bang, the rabbit detonated. Light and heat washed over the Emperor, and his legs buckled under the force. Just then, another explosion went off at his back. 3 landed a solid hit on his chest armor, and the resulting blast had blown it clean off his body. "This is the end," 3 said quietly. The black-hearted Emperor's armor had been destroyed, and 3's blade had found its bloody mark. Chapter 10. S and N. The Emperor had fallen to his knees. 3's sword protruding from his chest, he looked up at the night sky and gave a dry, bitter laugh. "Found some humor, have you, in the end? Found some humor in the end, in your end, have you?" asked 3. To think you would
best me,"
the Emperor said, his voice weak.
I admit it. I underestimated you. You are by far the most masterful tools I've ever had the pleasure of owning.
"Enough. We're not your tools any longer," 3 said, gripping his sword, preparing himself to silence the Emperor forever. So he thought to himself, the moment to kill had come yet again. The thing he hated most. The thing he would never grow accustomed to. Things were different this time, given that the man who stole away his humanity in the first place now sat at the end of his sword. But that didn't stop 3's hand from trembling. "S," 9 said gently, moving closer. "We'll do it together, okay?" Her typically light and relaxed expression was now that of serious and sincere. "Okay," 3 responded. This was it, the moment where the two would put their tragic past to rest. 9 placed her hands on 3's. Steadying his weapon, her warmth abated his trembling ever so slightly. They moved to raise the sword together. In response, the Emperor spoke once more.
Every arge of your pain thus far has been stained with blood. Every arge of your path thus far has been stained by blood, just as the rest of your lives shall be. Your fates are immutable. Kill or be killed. Control or be controlled. You will end up no different than I. We will ever be as one and the same.
"You're wrong," said 9. "We're no longer anyone's tools, and we'll never force anyone to be ours." "After this, we're done," said 3. "You're the last person we're ever going to kill." The two took a deep breath and spoke in unison. "Farewell." Off in some far-flung region of Calvard, a horse-drawn carriage plodded along. Aside from trains, most terrestrial transportation had long since switched to orbital cars, so such old-fashioned modes of travel was a rare sight to see. The more rustic method did have a certain undeniable charm, however. A boy drove the carriage while a young girl of about the same age lazed about within. "It makes you wonder how he got that way," the boy said, thinking back to the Emperor's face. the one that had been obscured by the cloak and the helmet. His appearance had been a poor fit for a monstrous behavior. If anything, he had been rather handsome. "Well, if you don't mind rumors and hearsay, I might have an answer for you." The girl's response came from within the carriage, delivered in her usual sleepy drawl. "I'm listening." "Well..." The girl's story went something like this. In a small country in some corner of the world, there once lived a vile, oppressive king. His reign was tyrannical, as his rule evil, and his people lived in fear. One day he died, and his son, the crown prince, was enthroned. The prince, this new king, was, at his core, kind and gentle soul who strove to govern in a fair way and fair and just manner. He was determined to avoid his father's errors, but perhaps because they were too accustomed to fear, no one met this new king's ideas with an open mind. Free assembly and speech had already been brutally suppressed during his father's reign, and people's rage had already reached a boiling point. Violent voices grew louder and louder, eventually resulting in a revolution. The Revolutionary Army launched the assault at the royal palace and forcibly converted the country into a republic, holding a new king accountable for his father's sins. Suddenly finding his life at risk, he had no choice but to flee, leaving behind his country and entire way of life. "You're telling me this prince eventually became an overseer?" the boy asked, his brow wrinkling in thought as he turned the story over in his head. "Who can say?" Girl shrugged. "I don't know if a kingdom like that ever existed in the first place." The girl rolled over to continue dozing in the carriage, bumping and bounding its way along the road. "Assuming this is more fact than fiction, then what?" the boy asked. "He was too kind and lost control of his kingdom, so he developed a powerful desire to control others? It's so hard to believe." The boy trailed off. He had no intention of giving the overseer a shred of sympathy, but strangely enough, he did find himself feeling a little pity for the man. The boy and girl fell silent for a few moments. The only sound that could be heard were the clopping of the horse's hooves and the creaking of the carriage. The boy broke the silence. "What is it?" The girl raised her head from her nap. Her voice remained relaxed as ever, but the boy's tone suddenly grew tense. "Is there any chance you could, ever forgive me? For what I did? For what happened between me and your brother?" "No." The girl's response was swift and blunt. The boy fell silent. He had no right to scorn her answer. "Never," she continued, "because he was my brother and I loved him. He was the only real family I ever had, so..." "So?" The girl paused for a moment, her cheeks flushed red, and then she continued in a much louder voice. "So, if you want me to forgive you, you can't leave me. We need to stick together, through thick and thin, you and me, S, N, and S." The boy smiled, his fear a moment ago having left him. "Of course. We'll always be there for each other. I'll have your back, and you'll have mine." The girl could barely contain the emotions welling within her chest at this point. Unfortunately for her, the boy continued talking. "I'll do my best to fill his shoes from now on, and that includes making sure you get the education you need to grow into the best person you can be." This was, in fact, not the answer the girl had been looking for. "I'm not talking about education!" she exclaimed she started violently shaking the carriage in frustration. "But what could possibly be more important? Hey, calm down. This thing can't take too much abuse. It's rickety enough as it is. If you make it fall apart, we'll have to walk the rest of the way." "Hey, Darth Taco." The girl settled back down, still not fully satisfied with his response, but resolved to leave things be for the moment. the topic changed again. So, any ideas? For the time being, their plan was to head to Le Burle or Le Mans, just as the boy had initially planned, but where to from there? They had yet to give it much thought. They knew they would be pursued by any number of people from the organization. Despite this, the two knew that as long as they stuck together, they'd find a way to manage. For the moment, they revealed the idea of an unknown future, a new path to tread that was all their own. In any case, we'll need to find some work, the boy said. Anything in mind? Well, he mused, a confident smile growing on his face. When we consider our skill set, how about something in theater? Not on your life, the girl said, swiftly retorted. Think about it, S. You are a terrible actor. Hey, I'm not that bad, and I'm sure a play would be way less pressure than an assassination mission. A tad deflated, the boy sank back into his seat and then threw out another idea, one somewhat more plausible than the last. I know. How about we become bracers? No way, the girl rejected the idea again, but with a bit less bite than before. I heard they get super busy. No sense in escaping one grave just to work yourself into another. There was also the question hanging over the air about whether the Bracer Guild would even consider taking people with the duo's unique background. All things considered, however, it wasn't the most outlandish idea. Fine. What's your bright idea then? Me? The girl yawned. All I want to do is lay around in bed every day and just sleep. You're ridiculous, the boy sighed. His face then lit up suddenly as he remembered something. Oh, right! What is it? Names, he said with a hint of excitement. I just realized we haven't shared our real names with each other. Oh, right. N is short for Nadia. That's my real name. Mine's Swin. Huh, the girl said, hiding a smile. So, S wasn't too far off then. Pretty crazy coincidence. There was a good reason her nickname for him had been so close to his real name. Her brother had mentioned it in one of his letters. She had known Swin's name before their paths even crossed. After they had worked together for a bit, she decided she wanted to call him something that resembled his actual name rather than his organization moniker. This, however, was something she intended to keep to herself. Well, in the end, you will always be S to me, and I'll always be N to you, right? Yeah, you're right. The carriage continued its slow roll forward, as did their conversation. It was profound at moments, but was otherwise silly, lighthearted, and most of all, free. The boy's name was Swin, S. The girl's name was Nadia, N. Together they were travelers discovering their newfound humanity. The end. Hey! All right, there we go. I'm gonna cut out part of that and just I'll put that up as a second audiobook. If you guys want to see like a real audiobook reading, though, I did do all of Carnelia over on the YouTube channel, so check that out if you haven't already. Magnificent Fluffy Tie! Welcome back to the Super Friends, my friend. The Chosen Ones, rebranded. Come on, Super Derek, get with the program. You missed that? No, I'm not. No, never reading this again. But I'm just saying, you guys wanna see Carnelia? I narrated an audiobook for Carnelia, and I made something a little experimental out of it. I added background visuals for the audiobook. Nothing, super bespoke or anything. But, and I also added sound effects, kind of give it a little more depth to the theater of the mind. A little bit of music too. Honestly, it's pretty badass, if I may say so myself. I'm super proud of it. Nobody watched the video though. I get it. It's super niche. But if you were able to sit through this, the other one where I'm actually like cutting out all the bad takes, super short, you'd love it. All right. So, let's see. I know. I think part of it is I don't even know what to call it. You watched it. There's I think a lot of y'all here probably watched it, actually. I'm nobody. I know. But in the grand scheme, like, how do you even advertise something like that, right? Like, I called it a visual audiobook because, like, I don't even know. What do you even call that? Do I have it? I don't even have save data on here. Wow, okay. Well, it's I feel kind of bad. Right? I was going to say TBH. I feel kind of bad, TBH, cuz I really don't think that I can start the game in earnest at this point. We've done the audiobook, at least. That was fine. We've done the groundwork. We did an unboxing. I made a mess, an absolute mess of all of my everything. I got all of these things I need to put away somewhere. It's actually super important to read the book. That's good. I guess it lays some of the groundwork that also goes into Daybreak 1 and 2. Am I understanding that? Sounds like that's the feeling that I'm getting. So I feel good about having done that. And maybe, I don't know, probably not gonna, thinking about should I download this and edit out all the bad takes? I don't know. Probably not. That gal in the back of that logo, is that Nadia? Yeah, you're probably right there, Nat. Oh, man. Okay. So, yeah, I think I should probably end the stream for now, before we actually start Reverie. Sorry, YouTube VOD viewers. Oh, man. But, speaking of the VODs and stuff, I actually do have a VOD channel. If you guys want to see it, you can. I just am in the process of putting out the last few Lufia videos. Oh yeah, TBH. Follow that link. Get subscribed. It's actually all right. Yeah. What did you do? You pressed the any key once. Yeah, 3 and 9 required reading. Yeah. Just subbed. No idea it existed. I do a real bad job of like letting people know where to find me. I've got like 3 YouTube channels now. Super Derek Streams, which honestly I need to do more with that. Awesome. Well, let's see. I think at this point, I'm a little out of practice, but I think at this point, it's tradition for me to raid somebody. The thing is, like, I need to find out who to raid, and I can only... It's dumb, I can't figure out who to raid from within the Twitch dashboard. I actually have to, like, go to my channel on Twitch so I can see recommendations of the channels that I follow. Let's see. We got options, but which option's the right option? Alright. What is this? What is Scott doing over on RPG Fan? Okay, looks like Scott's gonna do something with Final Fantasy VII Remake. I couldn't tell by the title. Awesome. I'm glad that oh my gosh. Just don't watch the really early stuff. I think my Sword of Mana was my first ever stream, and it's bad. You can see, oh my gosh. I got VODs going back there for nigh on 10 years now, I think. Alright, let's set up this raid. Yeah. Scott's doing something with Final Fantasy VII Remake. I can't quite tell if that's, you know, the new one? Part 1, Part 2, something else? I don't know. But if you're not already familiar with Scott, stick around. He's a super cool dude. And he's one of the writers for RPGFan.com. Yeah, he's good people. And bald is beautiful, indeed. Oh, say something about cat girls to Scott. Yes. Okay. When we get there, let's all say... Oh gosh, I don't know. What's something super weeby related to cat girls we could say? How about we just all include some sort of, let's just... I don't know. Let's call it a Nyan raid. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Let's just do that. Nyan raid. Or how about Nyan raid and then bonus points if you drop an uwu in chat. All right, we gotta go. See you guys. Ending scene. All right, here we go.